Chapter 27:19. After Chen Shan and the others returned, the big house finally had some life. Otherwise, there would be only Yu Xiaoyan, who was about to become a deity, left in this place. There was also Wei Wei Bai, who was as obedient as a kitten. The two of them couldn't make any noise. They were both gentle and weak. Chen Shan and the others felt that it was very quiet. Yu Xiaoyan also wanted to make this place livelier, but Wei Wei Bai didn't say anything. He didn't want to call those servants back. He was afraid that her fragile mind would think too much and see those servants. He would think of the scene where the two of them turned against each other. It was good that Chen Shan came back. Although he was rough, he still had thoughts. So Yu Xiaoyan let them eat hot pot. Wei Wei Bai was still on a diet and couldn't eat. She could only eat the light food that Yu Xiaoyan made for her. The food was unexpectedly delicious for a person who found learning to be easy. Yu Xiaoyan put in a lot of effort to learn cooking, so it was very easy to capture Wei Wei Bai's stomach. When he saw the girl use a white porcelain spoon to scoop up the soup he made and drink it sip by sip, it was rare to experience a sense of accomplishment that was different from the success of his career. It was another kind of peaceful and beautiful satisfaction. On the large round table, Chen Shan and a dozen or so senior team leaders, who had just recovered, were scooping meatballs and eating lamb strips. The fragrance curled up in the smoke. Wei Wei Bai looked enviously at Chen Shan, the meat in his hand. Then she continued to eat her own plain soup. There was no other way. Her body was almost ruined by the car accident. She was worried that she would die before she completed the task, because she was too weak. She could only eat the food that Yu Xiaoyan made. Yu Xiaoyan sat opposite her and was picking food for her. They had their own table, a small square table. It was placed not far from the round table. Behind them was the lotus pond that could be seen through the open window. The fallen lotus flowers in the pond had been cleaned up. The moonlight reflected on it was exceptionally beautiful. Wei Wei Bai suddenly shook the spoon in her hand. She frowned and pursed her lips, not saying anything. Yu Xiaoyan held her hand and took her spoon. "Is your arm numb again?" he asked in detail. Wei Wei Bai's voice was extremely calm. "I'm fine." However, Yu Xiaoyan pinched her wrist with his fingers and rubbed it bit by bit. He loosened her stiff arms. He lowered his head and massaged her seriously. She was already very familiar with this action. After all, during this period of time when her blood was blocked, she would always feel numb in her shoulders. He could even pinch the right amount of force to make her feel comfortable. Wei Wei Bai looked at him silently. Her lips moved, but in the end, she lowered her eyes and didn't say anything. Yu Xiaoyan seemed to be completely unaware of how much tenderness and humility his actions carried. After the meal, only then did Yu Xiaoyan tell Chen Shan about the transfer of assets. Chen Shan. Then he suddenly asked, "What's going on? Are you being coerced? Or did someone blackmail you?" Yu Xiaoyan thought for a moment, then turned around to look for Wei Wei Bai. He saw her walking slowly and seriously, while supporting herself against the wall not far away. The doctor told her to do some light movements. Therefore, after she was full, she would hold onto the wall like a child learning to walk. Step by step, she would seriously count her steps as she walked around the wall. It was cold outside, and he couldn't bear to let her go out for a walk. Because of the importance he attached to her body, Yu Xiaoyan sometimes felt that he was restraining her too much. Yu Xiaoyan's voice was faint, and there was only the shadow of that girl in his gentle eyes. "Yes, it's something that can be used against you?" Chen Shan asked anxiously, and his tone was unfriendly. "What do you mean, comma?" Chapter 27:20. The transfer of business was not a small matter. He felt that the sky had fallen when the company changed. After all, they had followed Yu Xiaoyan to build the business, and had already recognized Yu Xiaoyan. Wasn't it a joke to change someone else? Yu Xiaoyan turned his face and said casually, "My heart." Chen Shan? Yu Xiaoyan couldn't help but laugh. "I think it's worth it to use everything I have to exchange for her happiness." Chen Shan. He had once thought that his boss was going to become an immortal. He wished that he could find a wife to control him as soon as possible. Only now did he know that his boss had indeed become an immortal. A love immortal. Either he didn't look for one, or he had to be 30 years old with a pure look on his face. In the end, when he finally found one, he found such a young one. However, men were all like this. Who didn't want to find a young, old man who abandoned his chaff to marry a young girl? Of course, he despised this kind of thing very much. Chen Shan was still happy that although Yu Xiaoyan found a young one, he still found one after all. He should be more human. In the end, he wasn't human. It was a business that he had fought so hard to build. It was a company that he had worked so hard to transform. Just like that, this old lover of the Bai family gave it to his little girl. Had Yu Xiaoyan never seen the world, and never been in a relationship? Who would give away 90% of their net worth, just because they were in a relationship? The remaining 10% was probably in danger, because he saw the supplements that Yu Xiaoyan bought for Weiwei Bai. It was simply too expensive. Chen Shan felt that Yu Xiaoyan couldn't possibly ask Weiwei Bai for money. Therefore, he used the remaining money from his business to raise such a precious little cutie. This was too expensive. He hadn't even married her yet, and he was already bankrupt. Chen Shan was stunned and speechless for a moment. His mind was blank. He felt that he might as well have died in a car accident on the spot. He wouldn't have seen Yu Xiaoyan like Emperor Ming of the Tang dynasty, who wanted a beauty and gave up his business. Chen Shan rubbed his face with his hand in despair and cried, "So, are you telling me that we're going to lose our jobs?" They only recognized Yu Xiaoyan. Weiwei Bai and the rest did not acknowledge her. Yu Xiaoyan was already poor. How could they have the nerve to follow the new owner to eat and drink well? This was too unbrotherly. Yu Xiaoyan's attitude was sloppy, and his eyes kept following Weiwei Bai. He treated Chen Shan indifferently. No, she's not used to the company's operations. She's not in good health and loves to work. Moreover, having too much self-esteem leads to extreme inferiority and sensitivity. In the future, you have to make the documents simple and easy to understand. Try to reduce the number of meetings and time as much as possible. Chen Shan. Also, when you're done, leave her with the easiest way to clean up the mess. Let her feel that she's the one who did it well. That way she'll feel happier. Chen Shan looked at Yu Xiaoyan, ignoring Yu Xiaoyan's calm expression as he continued to give orders. She can do whatever she wants. If the company collapses, you can come to me. I'll clean up the mess for her. Chen Shan went from despair to numbness. In the end, he was expressionless. If you say so, you can do whatever you want. This was the first time he had seen his authority taken away. He could even be in charge of after-sales and be so happy. Chen Shan felt blood churning in his chest. He wanted to spit it out, but he couldn't. He only felt that his life was filled with the taste of despair. His boss was completely done for because of a girl. And he didn't just send himself to his doorstep. Chapter 27-21. Even their group of brothers were sent to be coolies. Yu Xiaoyan finally concluded calmly. You guys have to work harder. You have to rush to do all the hardest and most difficult things. You have to make her feel that starting a company is just like playing. She earned the money because she was smart. And you guys are useless if you lose money. I'm just a retired old man. When you want to complain to me, you can send me an email. At this point, he reminded them worriedly. Don't let her know the cruelty of society. I have to protect her. Chen Shan. You have to protect her. Who will protect their group of brothers? They had never seen their boss in a relationship like this. They had no fucking dignity, did they? Yu Xiaoyan suddenly looked up faintly. That pair of incomparably gentle eyes turned cold and calm. Do you understand? Chen Shan immediately clenched his fists and said seriously, I understand. I will do this difficult task well. Yu Xiaoyan, lower your voice. Chen Shan immediately pursed his lips and said softly, Yes, boss. Yu Xiaoyan. She will be your boss in the future. Chen Shan looked at the young girl, who was slowly walking forward with small steps. The tail of the girl's long hair was also swaying. She looked so cute. If he punched her, she would probably cry like a flower. In the end, Chen Shan helplessly covered his face. Yes, boss Weiwei. Yu Xiaoyan nodded. This kid was worth teaching. Then he got up and walked a few steps forward to the girl, who was walking seriously. He picked her up easily. Time's up. You're not allowed to leave. If you continue to walk, you'll hurt yourself. Weiwei Bai frowned. I think I'm okay. Yu Xiaoyan. I don't think so. Wei Weibai wanted to protest. Yu Xiaoyan suddenly looked dejected. Is it because I have nothing now that you don't even want to hear my concern? Wei Weibai. Yu Xiaoyan turned back again. His gentle gaze now looked at Chen Shan and the others with indescribable coldness. Chen Shan and the others immediately stood up. Then we'll take our leave. You guys have a good rest. Yu Xiaoyan looked at Chen Shan calmly. It seemed to be reminding him of something. Chen Shan looked at Wei Weibai, who was in his arms. The young girl's delicate and innocent appearance and her pair of pure eyes made her look pitiful and unthreatening. Was this their new boss? Chen Shan moved his mouth, but he felt as if his mouth was glued shut by superglue. It was extremely painful to open his mouth. In the end, he stared at Yu Xiaoyan's murderous eyes, lowered his head and shouted, "Boss sister-in-law, we'll be leaving first. Goodbye." Everyone shouted, "Boss sister-in-law, have a good rest." Yu Xiaoyan was a little stunned. When he came back to his senses, he did not say anything. Everyone rolled back one by one. The room returned to its tranquil and warm atmosphere. Wei Weibai tugged at his clothes. Her face was a little red as she mumbled, "Whose sister-in-law?" A gentle smile appeared on Yu Xiaoyan's stunned face. Whatever. Wei Weibai didn't know how to react. He seemed to have noticed her confusion. Yu Xiaoyan carried her into the room and whispered to her softly, "It's fine if you want to be the boss. I'll be the sister-in-law." The corner of Wei Weibai's eyes twitched. She had seen many thick-skinned people, but they were so thick-skinned that they looked so elegant and calm. No. During this period of time, Wei Weibai's understanding of the realm of thick-skinned people had been refreshed again. She felt that she could learn from Yu Xiaoyan in the future. There was no end to acting, and she had to constantly learn and deepen her lifelong career. Chapter 27-22. Therefore, Wei Weibai also smiled calmly. "Yes, sister-in-law." Yu Xiaoyan thought for a moment and put her on the bed. Then he corrected her. "That's not how you address our relationship." Wei Weibai pursed her lips and didn't say anything. She also fell for his trick. After all, he would definitely call her husband next. Yu Xiaoyan would definitely be able to call her by such a mushy name. He could even call her his wife. Yu Xiaoyan didn't continue to be disgusted. He turned around and came in with a foot bath. It was filled with warm Chinese medicine. He held Wei Weibai's feet and carefully massaged her feet, so that the blood in her feet would flow smoothly, and the coldness in her hands and feet would be relieved a little. Wei Weibai stared at his head. His soft and messy hair was stuck to his fair forehead. The man's appearance was still young and beautiful. However, there was an incomparably silent elegance. This was a temperament that a teenage boy couldn't have. He had always lived a noble life and lived a meticulous life. But he didn't expect that he would roll up his sleeves, cook, and wash someone's feet. Yu Xiaoyan didn't feel that he had sacrificed anything. But he knew Wei Weibai's psychological burden. Her toes were still trembling, and she wanted to escape. When he hugged her, she always turned her face to the side to avoid him. She didn't want him to see the injured side of her face. Yu Xiaoyan knew that this was a psychological problem, unless she recovered. Otherwise, she would still be concerned about her appearance. No one would be so indifferent to their disfigurement. But her physical condition didn't allow her to undergo surgery. She might have to endure for another year or two to make sure that her physical condition could recover before she could operate on her again. Otherwise, Yu Xiaoyan couldn't bear for her to take any risks. After washing her feet, Wei Weibai curled up in the warm blanket. She turned her body to face him. Yu Xiaoyan turned off the lights. After she was injured, she had been sleeping with the lights off. There was no mirror at home, so she didn't want to face herself. Yu Xiaoyan let her be. But no matter what she wanted to do, or how she broke down, she really wanted to be alone. He didn't leave, didn't fight back when she hit him, and didn't talk back when she scolded him. She couldn't bear to hit him anyway. Yu Xiaoyan would not give her personal space to think too clearly. She felt insecure and inferior. Wasn't he the same? He was afraid that she would wake up and not want him anymore. Yu Xiaoyan could only use everything he had to fill her time and space. This was the only thing he wanted to do. Put aside the company career and power. If she liked it, he would plan to give it to her. If she didn't like him one day, he wouldn't care. Wei Weibai curled up and covered herself with the quilt. In the dark, the man behind her had already hugged her tightly. She shook her body and reached out to cover the bandage on the side of her face. Her voice was somewhat choked as she said, "I'm very ugly." Even after so long, he still couldn't let go. Yu Xiaoyan was silent for a moment and gently held her hand so that she couldn't touch the bandage. "Don't worry, it'll get better," Wei Weibai said. "You don't have to be so good to me. It's true that I betrayed you and wanted you dead." Yu Xiaoyan was silent for a while before sighing softly. "Yes, I know." After saying this, the corners of his mouth had already curled up. "So be good to me in the future. Otherwise, you'll let me down even more." Wei Weibai seemed to be choked by his words, and her mind was stuck for a moment. Finally she said, "What if I betray you one day in the future?" Yu Xiaoyan asked casually, "What kind of betrayal?" Wei Weibai probed. "For example, taking off your clothes, whipping you, or something like that." Yu Xiaoyan fell silent. Wei Weibai thought that there was no hope. However, she felt that the man behind her had already carefully gotten up and turned on the light. She didn't know where he got the small whip that she hid under the bed. Under the light, a lazy and strange smile appeared on the man's calm and elegant face. There was actually a beautiful and charming feeling. "What do you mean by whipping? How do you do it? Do you need me to take off my clothes?" Wei Weibai. Her target was too proactive, and she was a little unable to control herself. Chapter 27-23. Under the dim bedside lamp, the man leaned against the bed. There were beautiful wooden buttons on his black silk pajamas. His slender fingertips had a strange sense of beauty under the dim light. Those beautiful fingertips had already reached the buttons and were unbuttoning them one by one. The skin under the man's beautiful white neck was exposed little by little. His skin color was as smooth as jade, and his chest below his collarbone was as beautiful as a work of art. Wei Weibai took the small whip that Yu Xiaoyan had given her and sat under the blanket. There was a trace of surprise in her eyes. Her eyes trembled slightly and swept across his neck. She found that the man's Adam's apple was moving. A blush swept across her face and reached her ears. Her eyes were red and delicate, and her fingers were holding the prop whip. It was more like a kind of pitiful temptation. Yu Xiaoyan's breath stopped for a long time. When he finally recovered his breath, he sat up. "I won't scare you anymore," he whispered, but his voice was unusually hoarse and sexy. It was obviously polite and elegant words, but for some reason, there was a trace of insincerity in them. Wei Weibai's eyes relaxed, and she was about to put down the whip. Yu Xiaoyan had already leaned forward, and his clothes were all scattered, revealing his strong upper body. Even the lines of his abdominal muscles could be seen. Her hand trembled, and the tail of the whip swept across his body. A faint red mark appeared on his body. Yu Xiaoyan's skin was fairer than ordinary people. Even if it was so faint that it was almost invisible, it was unusually clear on his skin. Wei Weibai's voice trembled. I didn't do it on purpose." After saying that, she was about to throw the whip away. Yu Xiaoyan smiled, stretched out his long arm, and held her wrist. The man's strong breath and the fragrance of his bath were like a kind of demonic poison, eroding this quiet space with an irresistible posture. His pair of affectionate eyes were burning with desire at this moment, and his breathing was unusually heavy. Wei Weibai stared at him blankly. The man smiled and slowly lowered his head. His thin lips were flirtatious and gently attached to the whip. His pair of gentle and beautiful eyes gently lifted. "It's okay. I like your intention." The man's words were like a demon in the dark night, full of evil and irresistible bewitchment. "So you can be more intentional." Just as he finished speaking, he saw the young girl in his arms, and he was stunned. She wanted to pull back the whip, but she also wanted to dodge. She turned her body and tried to get off the bed. He was like a shy deer that was about to escape, and had a bad feeling in advance. Yu Xiaoyan sighed faintly. He felt that he was simply too crazy. He really couldn't control himself when it came to her. She was still young. Yu Xiaoyan was still trying to convince himself. But as soon as the girl got off the bed, the man instinctively grabbed her whip and pulled her back with the whip. Yu Xiaoyan hugged her and whispered, "It's okay. Sleep well. I won't hurt you." Wei Weibai paused and thought that it was true. Yu Xiaoyan said, "Of course, you can whip me again." Wei Bai. So she tried and whipped him. After all, the mission still had to be completed. Then, she confirmed one thing again. If a man's words could be trusted, Tong Zi could fix the reject button for the side mission. This night was too long. In the end, Wei Bai only wanted to use the whip to tire this man, who had never seen a woman in 8 lifetimes. Chapter 27-24. The system. The side quest. There was nothing wrong with them showing their faces. It meant that they were locked in the little black room again. It was just a whip. Why did they have to be locked in the little black room? The system and the side quest seemed to know something, but they could not say. Since they had nothing to do, the system asked the side quest, "Why are you so free? The side quest is so difficult. Do you want to go to heaven? Don't think that I won't hit you just because you're a spirit. Other people's side quests are so easy. Why is it so difficult for my host? Did I step on your grave in my past life and use your ashes for rice?" The side quest looked at the limited edition golden truffle chocolate in the system's hand. It used the system's ashes to cook and eat his in its past life. So he stole the food in its fridge in this life. He had never seen such a shameless system. But then he thought about his host. The side quest was relieved. The two of them were of the same character. As expected of the pair of hosts who had the worst morals, the lowest bottom line, the least moral character, and the one whose conscience could poison a dog to death. The side quest said, "Because other people would reject the side quest, but you didn't reject it from beginning to end. The side quest will be upgraded automatically. If you reject it once, it will automatically return to the level 1 easy mode. Even if you don't reject it next time, it will still be a simple mission." The system said, "We never meant to reject," the side quest said. "This means that the difficulty of the side quest will automatically increase. If you keep accepting the side quest, the difficulty will always increase. This is the main system setting and can't be changed." The system. The side quest was angry. "I'm troubled too. The side quest has always been automatically assigned, because simple missions don't need too many procedures to start." The system. The side quest said, "I've never seen an idiot who keeps accepting side quests. Isn't this looking for death?" The system that was looking for death. The side quest asked coldly, "Hee, why didn't you reject it? You made me unable to automatically assign it, and could only monitor the completion of the side quest." The system could not say that he could not reject it. That would be embarrassing. So he calmly replied, "Oh, it's hard, hee." The side quest was even angrier. "Are you crazy? Can't you reject it and let the side quest automatically return to level 1 difficulty? Do you know that the difficulty of your quest has increased to level 100? The system was expressionless. "Oh, awesome." Side quest. "Now that the difficulty level is so high, I can't even rest. Every time there's a level 100 side quest, I have to pay full attention to it, in case the device suddenly breaks down." The system pursed its lips. "Good luck." The side quest asked again, "Why didn't you reject the mission?" The system was silent for a moment before it began to chew on the chocolate. Why didn't he refuse? Because his equipment was broken. What other reason could there be? Could he say it? If he did, he would lose face. Therefore, he could only cry and act tough. That's because being invincible is so boring. That's why the side quests are our tonic. Side quest. This pair of hosts is really sick. He was actually courting death, in such a cool manner. The branch was deeply shaken. The system turned around gracefully, as if nothing had happened. Tong Zi silently nibbled on the chocolate. In a place where no one knew, she silently looked up at the sky. If the host knew the reason why the side quests had become difficult, she would beat him to death. /quick. Chapter 27-25. It definitely would. Therefore, it was better to pretend that it didn't know about this matter. Let the host continue to misunderstand the side quest, and jump to the side quest's grave disco bar. The side quest felt a little cold, but it didn't know who was cursing it. The sun, which was close to noon, made the person lying on the bed move under the blanket. A hand gently reached out from under the blanket. Countless ambiguous marks could be seen on the inside of her wrist. The man, who had heard the commotion, had already turned sideways. He reached out and was tying his tie. His suit jacket was casually draped on the back of the chair. He stood beside the mirror, wearing a light-colored shirt and black suit pants. The perfect clothes had a perfect slimming effect, making the curve of his waist show a beautiful outline. Yu Xiaoyan's eyes were gentle and affectionate. In the past, his deep feelings always had an ethereal immortal aura. He was like a person who didn't eat the food of the mortal world. He looked beautiful and exquisite, but he was like an artistic decoration, without any sense of reality. People often looked at him and felt that young Master Yu was too cold and aloof. They couldn't get close to him. He also seemed out of place in this world. They were afraid that he would one day become a wild crane. But now, Yu Xiaoyan finally showed the strength and maturity of a man. The gentleness in his eyes also contained a burning desire. He casually loosened the tie that was half done, and let the tie fall loosely on his chest. Then he walked to the bedside barefooted. The girl under the blanket seemed to have sensed something. She trembled and was about to escape. But before she could do anything, the man had already stretched out his strong arm, picked her up with the blanket, and pressed her into his arms. It was like hugging a doll that couldn't resist. Yu Xiaoyan reached out and took away the blanket covering her head, letting the blanket fall on her shoulders. The girl's shoulders were thin, but they were round and beautiful. There were traces of him on them. Yu Xiaoyan's eyes were extremely dark. He touched her face and felt the temperature of her trembling skin. At this moment, Yu Xiaoyan no longer had a trace of elegant immortal aura. There was only a mature man with a greed and uncontrollable passion for his woman. He lowered his head and kissed the bandage on her face. His breath blew on the girl's face, giving her no chance to protest. The way he hugged her was too familiar and natural. She didn't even have the strength to resist. After kissing her, Yu Xiaoyan said, "I'll go to the company for a meeting today to help you deal with the backlog of work. Then, I'll arrange for a doctor to come and take a look at you." Wei Bai lowered her eyes. The corners of her eyes were red and watery. She pursed her lips and remained silent. Yu Xiaoyan knew that she was angry. He had gone overboard last night, and in the end, he had nothing to lose. He could no longer suppress his thoughts, so he might as well force it a little. It was almost half coaxing before it was done. After she was injured, her mind was fragile. Midnight was the time when her heart was at its softest and most helpless. Her pitiful appearance should be the last moment of consolation. But he used it for something else. No wonder she was so angry when she woke up. Wei Bai's big eyes were like grapes soaked in water, exceptionally clear and beautiful. She seemed to want to condemn him. However, she saw that the man was stubborn and thick-skinned. In the end, she lowered her head helplessly and sighed. Yu Xiaoyan stared at her helpless expression that was pretending to be mature and couldn't help but smile. Wei Bai changed the topic in a low voice. "Didn't I say that I would return the thing to you?" When Yu Xiaoyan saw the side of her face, the tip of her small ear peeked out from her thick hair. He leaned over and said softly, almost touching the tip of her ear, "You don't have to return it. If you want, I can put it in a gift box and walk over myself, so that you can open it." Chapter 27-26. Wei Bai felt itchy in her ears. She couldn't help but mutter, "You sent yourself to me. And you still don't know who took advantage of you." If he sent himself to her, wouldn't she have to do the same? Yu Xiaoyan only felt that his heart had melted into a ball, and there was no sharp and hard thing in his heart. He nodded without principle. "Yes, I took advantage of you, it's all my fault. Why don't I go buy a durian and kneel down?" Wei Bai, you're addicted to self-abuse, aren't you? She thought of the whip that was broken into pieces last night. Then she thought of the red marks on his back. Wei Bai felt that she couldn't think about it anymore, or else her brain would be blocked. Yu Xiaoyan affectionately kissed her for a while, and finally left in a sticky manner. Lunch was prepared on the table. The new clothes were folded and put aside. Her body was dry, and the bedding was from early in the morning. It was changed. She was not alarmed. This meant that Yu Xiaoyan's movements were unusually careful. Love Garden was cleaned up, and all kinds of flowers were revealed. There was a beautiful scenery outside the window. Wei Bai calmly put on her clothes, calmly rolled up her slightly long sleeves, and calmly looked at the marks on her skin. She was used to drinking. She sat at the dining table calmly and ate expressionlessly. The system was finally not released. He glanced at the favorability, and the male lead's favorability was actually 98. The charm of the whip last night was too great. The system cleared its throat and asked cautiously, "Why are you still angry?" Wei Weibai stared at the bowl faintly. "No, I'm not angry." System. The host was still angry. Although she was still dedicated to the strategy, and dedicated to sticking to the first position of the strategy. But as her system, of course he knew. When the host woke up from the car accident, when she held the mirror, and saw the wound on her face, that gloomy expression. At that moment, the system thought that she was going to stab Yu Xiaoyan to death with a knife. Then the host was in a bad mood. Even now he could not forget it. He went to the supermarket to look for beautifying medicine, intending to heal her disfigurement. The host said gloomily, "No need, it's fine like this." The system replied, Is it good?" The host smiled and touched his wound. A creepy smile appeared on his pale face. "The taste of disfigurement is not bad, hee. Damn, it felt like the surrounding temperature had dropped by 50 degrees. He was a polar bear that was going to freeze to death. Then he heard the host say lightly, "It's getting cold, let Yu Xiaoyan die." The blow of disfigurement drove the host crazy. Wei Weibai finished her meal expressionlessly and said, "There are only a few days left before the Hainan Airlines project is completed. There was only one other mission left, which was for Yu Xiaoyan to praise her verbally." The system replied, "Yes, you can play after you're done." This time the waiting time was a little longer. He couldn't go back after completing it. When Wei Weibai heard this, she revealed a gentle smile. "What are we playing?" The system replied, "Travel around the world or eat and drink." Wei Weibai said, "That's not fun." The system said, "How about?" Wei Weibai touched the bandage on her face. "How about we play with Yu Xiaoyan? After we're done with the mission, it must be exciting to jump off a building in front of him." The system said, "Are you still angry?" The blow of disfigurement was too big, causing the host to be mentally unstable. Wei Weibai smiled a bright and sweet smile. "Of course not. Which eye of yours saw that I was angry? I just thought that it would be fun to become a ghost after death, and ride on Yu Xiaoyan's neck every day." The system was speechless. "How is that fun? It's scary." The and read the at https://www.sashu.com/the and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com/ and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com the and read the full article at https://m.sashu.com the comma. Chapter 27. After the meeting, Yu Xiaoyan sat in the conference room and talked to the doctors from M country about the surgery. This was the most authoritative aesthetic surgery institution. After he finished talking, he turned off the video. Beside him, Chen Shan was working hard to organize the information. Is the Hainan Airlines project going to start? It had been stopped for more than 2 months. If it stopped again, it would probably fail. Even if it started again now, it would lose more than 30% of the benefits. On a huge project, 30% of the benefits was very objective. The project had reached this point. No matter how it was done, it would be a loss. However, Chen Shan knew that Yu Xiaoyan had his own plans. Even if the project was a loss, it had to be done because this project was to lay the foundation for the company's transformation. It could only be restarted earlier to reduce the losses. Yu Xiaoyan crossed his hands gently, and there was a gentle light in his dark eyes. He slowly smoothed his cuffs. There was an exceptionally clear bite mark on his wrist. Last night he was too anxious. She bit him when she was in pain. Yu Xiaoyan touched the bite mark with his fingertips and said gently, "I'll go home and ask Wei Wei." Chen Shan stopped organizing the information and looked desperate. Are we really working for her? All the industries were transferred to Wei Weibai. Now they were not the only ones working. Yu Xiaoyan was also working. The despair came too violently. It was hard to accept for a moment. The boss had become a bootlicker. She had licked until she had nothing. Yu Xiaoyan looked up and looked at Chen Shan indifferently. After a long time, Chen Shan finally lowered his head. He was extremely aggrieved. All right, let her be the boss. I have no objections. If he dared to have any objections, Yu Xiaoyan could freeze him to death with his gaze. Yu Xiaoyan slowly got up and said, "Deal with the participants of the Hainan Airlines project. Some people think that I'm dead." These words were so cold that people couldn't help but feel numb on their backs. When Yu Xiaoyan returned, he saw that the big house was brightly lit. He walked in and saw that the butler and servants were all there. The butler came up and took his clothes for him. He bowed his head and said respectfully, "Mr. Yu." Yu Xiaoyan's expression was still calm. "Miss is willing to let you come back." He had once instructed the servants who were chased away to rest assured and receive their salaries, as if they were on vacation. If Wei Weibai told them to come back one day, only then would they be able to return. After all, he was used to using the servants and butlers that he had personally selected. It was not easy to find a group of outstanding servants with the same habits. He was afraid that she would find it inconvenient in the future, but he couldn't take care of her. If she needed a servant, she couldn't find one. So he decided to keep it for her. He just didn't expect that she would call him back so early. It seemed that his mood had improved. The butler nodded. "Miss has already eaten, but she doesn't seem to have a good appetite." Yu Xiaoyan couldn't help but smile. The man's eyes were filled with gentleness and affection. "She likes what I make." When he was learning how to cook, she was the only one who tasted his food. Wei Weibai was very picky. He had also spent a lot of effort to nourish her body and stomach. It was also for the sake of letting everything about him invade her life and become an indispensable habit for her. Habits are hard to change. For example, once loving her became a habit, it was unlikely that he could change it for the rest of his life. Yu Xiaoyan rolled up the cuffs of his shirt. The teeth marks were already a little red and swollen. When the butler saw it, his eyebrows moved. Yu Xiaoyan said, "It's okay. I'm happy to see it." Not only was he happy, but he also felt the download the to read on your phone. The comma. Chapter 27-28. The man's eyes darkened, and there was a hint of bewitchment in them. Then he smiled as if nothing had happened. "In the future, there may be more wounds like this. You'll get used to it." The butler's face turned red, and he immediately left. Yu Xiaoyan went to the kitchen and made a bowl of Wei Weibai's favorite porridge. He also personally chose the ingredients to make a few fresh side dishes. "Serve it for supper around 10 o'clock. He instructed in a low voice, and then slowly wiped his wet fingers with a dry cloth. The man standing in the kitchen was extremely elegant. He threw the towel away, and the kitchen was extremely quiet. Everyone waited until he walked out before they dared to speak. In the future, all standards in the kitchen will be set by Mississippi, the kitchen butler instructed after Yu Xiaoyan left. Everyone nodded immediately. Yu Xiaoyan walked into the room and saw Wei Weibai squinting at the window, casually looking at the moon. She was wearing a loose robe. Her pants were too long. She rolled up her pants, revealing her delicate and beautiful ankles and round toes. Her black hair was wet and scattered. Yu Xiaoyan walked over, reached for a clean towel, and quietly walked behind her. The man slowly bent down, gently picked up some of her black hair with his fingers, and gently wiped it with the towel. Wei Weibai seemed to have just realized that there was someone behind her, and she turned around. She saw Yu Xiaoyan lowering his head and wiping her hair. The man's eyelashes were very long, and his eyes were very deep, but it made the gentle curve at the corners of his eyes even more beautiful. His voice was hoarse. "How can you stand by the window after washing your hair? You'll get a headache." She had to take care of herself. Yu Xiaoyan's heart ached for her weak body. Back then, she was born with a difficult birth, and her body was weak to begin with. Not to mention the days she had spent in the Bai family all these years. Although she ate and drank a lot, she did not receive any good treatment. Bai Yanlan scolded and hit her as and when she wanted. Therefore, he could understand her pain. She could not struggle, and wanted to take away the power in his hands. After all, to her, the people who had been abusing and humiliating her were all because they held power in their hands. Was that why they could treat her like this? Therefore, Yu Xiaoyan was very tolerant of her idea of seizing power. Bai Weiwei lowered her eyes and faintly looked outside. I just feel that the outside is pretty good. Yu Xiaoyan's fingers paused and his gaze fell on her neck. There was a mark he had left behind. Because a day and a night had passed, the mark became even more obvious. The faint red color tempted his mind. He pursed his lips and did not say anything. This silence was a sign of a guilty conscience. Using the excuse of recuperating or other inconspicuous reasons, he restricted her freedom, prevent her from leaving the house. He was afraid that she would go out. Yu Xiaoyan bit her lip, and a rare trace of embarrassment appeared on her face. The self-loathing in his heart was still there. That was why he was so resistant to her idea of going out. How nice would it be if she could just stay in the house that he built forever? This way, she would be able to meet anyone and encounter anything. He knew everything. Weiwei Bai was still young, and there was almost a gap in their ages. Now looking at their appearances, they knew that there was a difference in age. But it was not obvious yet. What about in the future? What if he slowly grew old while she was still young? Or what if she loved him and went back on her word? Yu Xiaoyan suppressed too many worries and did not show the slightest dissatisfaction or melancholy. Instead, Yu Xiaoyan revealed a gentle smile and gently wiped her wet hair. There's a banquet meeting in a week's time on the cruise ship. Come with me. It's good to relax. It's a banquet meeting. Quick transmigration system. Male God, come here. Chapter 27-29. A banquet meeting was the kind that was not considered a formal meeting. It was just a banquet where everyone gathered to talk about the progress of the project. Although some ideas would appear, but they would not formally agree to anything. This was the first meeting he held about the project after the Hainan Airlines project stopped. Weiwei Bai did not stop the Hainan Airlines project from continuing. Yu Xiaoyan was not in a hurry. He would wait until she was happy and did not care about the project anymore. It was only then that it started. As for the banquet meeting, it was just to reassure those people and to take care of the family that had made a move on Weiwei Bai. He had collected almost all the information. It was time to clean it up. After all, Yu Xiaoyan's gaze fell on the side of Weiwei Bai's face under the thick medical bandage. It was a mistake that he would never forgive himself for. He could not keep the person who had hurt her as an eyesore. Weiwei Bai held her face with both hands and said without much interest, yes. A week later, it would be exactly 3 months. The side mission was almost completed. Suddenly, she felt the skin on her neck itch. The man's warm fingers passed through her long hair and caressed her skin unhurriedly. Weiwei Bai turned around strangely. What are you doing? Yu Xiaoyan's eyes lit up. He seemed to be a little embarrassed to lower his head. Nothing. I made supper. We'll eat it later. Although Weiwei Bai was not hungry yet, Yu Xiaoyan's cooking was delicious, so she nodded. Okay. Yu Xiaoyan said. It's too early to eat supper. Let's play a game. Weiwei Bai was still thinking about other things and was not prepared for it. What game? Yu Xiaoyan smiled. His pair of affectionate eyes were burning with her figure, as if they were locking onto something. A very good game. Weiwei Bai was stunned. She was pulled into his arms. Her black hair was draped over his body. The man's kiss carried a warm breath. He kissed her delicate earlobe with some trembling. Weiwei Bai. Game. The man chuckled. After all, he was a monk who had never eaten meat before. When he suddenly ate meat, he couldn't stop his craving and wanted to eat more. Don't want to stop. It was after 12 o'clock when Bai Weiwei ate supper. The housekeeper and the servants didn't dare to step forward and stood far away. He stood like a wooden sculpture before he could finally carry the supper in the incubator. A week passed neither quickly nor slowly. Anyway, Weiwei Bai felt that Yu Xiaoyan was like a cat that smelled fish, clinging to her every day. She couldn't kick him away even when she tried. However, the favorability didn't increase at all. It was still 98. The banquet was held on a cruise ship in international waters. In this place, if one fell into the water, it was basically over. Weiwei Bai was wearing a cheongsam and a priceless imperial jade bracelet. Yu Xiaoyan had personally bought it from the auction. It was said that the price had even set a new record for the auction. Yu Xiaoyan liked these broken stones and a pile of broken silk. Then he used all these things on her. The girl's figure was beautiful and elegant. After being by Yu Xiaoyan's side for a long time, she naturally had an otherworldly temperament. She was exceptionally eye-catching. Even if there was a bandage on the side of her face, it didn't hurt her young and tender beauty. This was the second time Yu Xiaoyan had brought her to a public banquet. The last banquet almost released the demons in his heart. His desire for the girl was like a beast that had been released from its cage, unable to be suppressed. He almost did something irreparable to her. This time, he still didn't like it very much. To read at https://www.sashu.com to read at https://m.sashu.com the Chapter 2730. The gazes of others fell on her. Yu Xiaoyan lowered his eyes and let Wei Wei Bai hold his arm. Then they walked into the crowd. The man was wearing a fitted black suit. His waist was unusually smooth, and his legs under the suit were unusually slender. The disadvantages of Asians wearing suits didn't appear on him at all. For the first time, an elegant and cold expression appeared on Yu Xiaoyan's exquisite face. His gentle gaze fell on the girl beside him. The girl was wearing a crescent white cheongsam. The cheongsam had fine old-fashioned dark patterns. The expensive fabric didn't look bloated at all. Instead, it made the girl's delicate appearance look even more cold and noble. If there were still people who doubted the rumor that Yu Xiaoyan had fallen in love, now everyone believed it, because when Yu Xiaoyan entered the arena, that pair of gentle eyes, at this moment, were filled with a bone-piercing light. And this light was given to the girl beside him. The two of them were like the natural center of attention. Those business tycoons who were qualified to talk to them couldn't wait to go up and exchange pleasantries. The Hainan Airlines project was stopped. Yu Xiaoyan's business was transferred. None of them could cover up this man's brilliance, nor did they make anyone look down on him. A real loser wasn't like Yu Xiaoyan. Yu Xiaoyan's attitude was gentle and natural as he dealt with people. His casual words revealed some things about the business meeting. Some people considered it, while others agreed. Banquets and meetings were always a little casual. After chatting, Yu Xiaoyan was worried that Wei Wei Bai was tired, so he took her to a corner. This was a semi-public resting area with round sofas to sit. Wei Wei Bai sat down. Yu Xiaoyan reached out and stroked her hair. He said softly, "I'll get you some juice. You can have dinner later. Tonight, you'll sleep on the cruise." After saying that, he couldn't help but smile. However, she seemed to have understood something, and the tips of her ears immediately turned red. Yu Xiaoyan's eyes were dark, and his thin lips curved slightly. Then he turned around to get her some juice. Chen Shan was also wearing a suit. When he saw Yu Xiaoyan coming over, he immediately walked over and whispered beside him, "He's already under surveillance." Yu Xiaoyan's footsteps did not stop. He walked to the dining table and began to pick fruits. He was going to get her some juice. Fresh fruit was better, and he could use a few kinds of fruits to make a good juice. The man held an orange in his hand. His voice was low and calm. "In 10 minutes we'll arrest him." Chen Shan nodded respectfully. "Yes." Yu Xiaoyan paused again, and seemed to be a little troubled. Chen Shan immediately felt that something was wrong and asked, "What's wrong? Is there a change in the plan?" Yu Xiaoyan touched another lemon for seasoning. "That's not important. There's no juicer here. Go get one from the kitchen." Chen Shan. Wei Wei Bai gloomily said to the system, "Riding on his neck is too tiring. How about I hang upside down on his back?" System. Are you planning to practice acrobatics by becoming a ghost? Suddenly, a pleasantly surprised voice sounded. "It's you. Are you here for the banquet too?" Wei Wei Bai looked up and saw a man in a blue suit holding a glass of wine and looking at her with a bright smile. She was silent for a moment. It seemed to be the male celebrity she had used to provoke Yu Xiaoyan. She just couldn't remember his name. She had always been forgetful when it came to tools and cannon fodder. Just as she was about to show a perfunctory smile and say a few polite words, suddenly, her arm was grabbed by someone. With a pull, she fell into a warm and strong embrace. Then, she felt her lips being kissed heavily. The man who was hugging her slowly looked up. There was a hint of gloomy coldness in his beautiful eyes. "I'm sorry." His voice was indifferent. "She's taken." Chapter 2731. Yu Xiaoyan's fingers were still on the girl's chin. There was a thin layer of ice in his eyes, but there was an insincere smile at the corner of his mouth. Or is it that the woman you like is someone else's woman? This sentence was too harsh. The celebrity trembled heavily, and his face turned pale. He immediately smiled awkwardly and retreated. He didn't even continue to exchange pleasantries and left. Wei Weibai took another look at the fleeing figure. The man beside her, whose eyes were already cold, became even more dissatisfied at this moment. His voice was slightly hoarse and he smiled lazily. Why? Do you like this kind of young boy? Their ages were not far apart. At least compared to him. That male celebrity was much younger. Wei Weibai wrinkled her nose, and then said expressionlessly, sour. The coldness in Yu Xiaoyan's eyes lessened, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Why do I feel that it's sweet? Wei Weibai looked at him blankly, but she realized that he was approaching her step by step. She retreated and finally curled up on the sofa. There was no escape. She was hidden in the round sofa. When others looked up, they only saw Yu Xiaoyan bending down slightly, as if he was saying something. Yu Xiaoyan's back was facing the light, and the shadow shrouded the girl. His elegant and beautiful face had a hint of evil charm in the shadow. His fingers gently caressed her lips. Sour or sweet, do you want to try? Wei Weibai's face immediately flushed red, and she quickly shook her head. Yu Xiaoyan smiled, but the dark and paranoid look in his eyes did not disappear. Instead, it became even worse. His voice was muffled by the sound of sand. I don't want it, I don't want to force a sale. This hooligan's words were completely unreasonable. Then Wei Weibai felt the battle between sweet and sour. His fingers pressed on her shoulders, trapping her in the sofa. After a long time, he wiped the moisture at the corner of her lips. He whispered softly, sweet or sour. Wei Weibai, shameless. Yu Xiaoyan smiled and returned to being an elegant, cold, and noble young master. He held her hand. Let's go dance. The dance was casual. The two of them were social, but the music was not intense. After the dance slowly finished, the banquet was almost over. Yu Xiaoyan took Wei Weibai to eat, and he even personally went to the kitchen on the cruise ship to make soup for her. After dinner, the fireworks show began. Yu Xiaoyan held Wei Weibai's hand. Under the beautiful fireworks, she heard the man's voice was soft. I want to watch the fireworks every year. This sentence was Young's. After he was Yu Xiaoyan's Su was Yu. However, he heard the girl beside him turn her head to look at him. Her eyes were extremely gentle under the dazzling fireworks. She responded casually, and continued to look up at the fireworks. The gorgeous light and shadow of the fireworks fell. Her beautiful figure was outlined vividly and beautifully. Yu Xiaoyan was stunned for a long time. Then he lowered his head and smiled. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 99. After the fireworks, it was already 11 o'clock. Yu Xiaoyan stayed in the room until Wei Weibai fell asleep. Then he put on his slippers and went out. The sleeping Wei Weibai slowly opened her eyes. She turned over, and used her fingers to support the side of her face that was fine. Is the strategy time still pending? The system flipped through the information. It found that the information had changed. No, it's finally updated. The strategy time is 3 days. Wei Weibai. Was 3 days a joke? Mobile reading. Chapter 2732. It must be. Or was it because the time limit was stuck, and there was no more? The system was silent. After all, it had to conquer someone like Yu Xiaoyan in 3 days. It would be faster to just kill him. It had been more than half a year since the host transmigrated. She had almost finished the male lead and the side quest. Finally, Wei Weibai rubbed her chin and sighed. There are advantages to waiting for time. This was equivalent to giving her a free period of time. Although this free period of time was not stable, it was better than nothing. Of course, there were disadvantages as well. If she waited for a long time, she would really be tortured in this world forever. Wei Weibai lifted the blanket. Okay, let's get to work. The system said. There are still 3 days, no rush. Wei Weibai touched her face. This body is already disfigured. It's torture for me to stay in this body for a day. The system said. I'll buy you a disfigurement healing potion. Wei Wei Bai hesitated but still rejected, no need. The system was confused. Wasn't this what the host liked the most? Why did she keep rejecting it? Wei Wei Bai sighed. After all, I've always been beautiful. This is the first time in my life that I've experienced a disfigurement. This is a special experience. The system said. Then what did you experience? Wei Wei Bai said. I experienced that I want to beat that old bastard Yu Xiaoyan to death. Those who abuse my face will not have a good life. I want to keep this disfigured face to annoy him. The system? Wei Wei Bai sneered. He wants me to do plastic surgery. No, I'll use this face to scare him for as long as I stay by his side. The system? Wei Wei Bai said with bad intentions. I've thought about it. The next time he dares to climb into bed, I'll remove the bandage at the most critical moment and scare him until he can't do it. The system rubbed its face. After the host's disfigurement, it was not because there was a problem with her mind that she did not recover. It was because her brain was all wrong. What she cared about was that if she looked bad, she would make the male lead feel bad. What kind of fucking revenge was this? The system thought that it understood the host well enough. Wrong. He felt that he would never be able to understand the host's brain. What she cared about was not something that normal people would care about. Wei Wei Bai paused and waved her hand. Forget it. I'm sick of being disfigured. Let's go home. The system asked. How do you plan to end this? 1 hour to go. The time for the side quest was almost up. The end of the Hainan Airlines project was considered complete, because it was impossible to activate in such a short time. There was only one mission left. Even if she was better than him, Yu Xiaoyan had to say it himself. Previously, Wei Wei Bai had tempted him to admit that she was amazing. But Yu Xiaoyan didn't think that way. He didn't admit that she was amazing either. Therefore, the bait was considered a failure. Wei Wei Bai put on her slippers and walked out slowly. There will be a chance. After all, I don't believe that the bad guy won't resist if I force him to his death. Regardless of whether it was stabbing Yu Xiaoyan to death or use some other method, she would always have a chance to fish in troubled waters. The system tried its best to look into the torture room, and it really did see the bad guys. Yes, that bad guy seems to have brought a dozen poisonous snakes. Wei Wei Bai was speechless. Poisonous snakes. She didn't like these round animals. Wei Wei Bai asked in disdain. Can the poisonous snakes kill people? The system said. Of course they can, but it takes time. If we can get the snake serum, we should be able to get it back. Download the https://m/sashu.com/. Chapter 2733. Wei Wei Bai. Not poisonous enough, add more venom to the poison. System. This was the first time it heard of someone adding venom to a poisonous snake. Wei Wei Bai. 1 bite and you'll be done for. The kind that can't be saved. System. Are you planning to commit suicide? This was the host's super cliché old trick. Die for you. Are you touched? Are you miserable? Torture? Torture? Then hurry up and increase your affinity. By Wei Wei. Am I such a dog-blood cliché? System. What do you think? Wei Wei Bai. I am. System. Such thick-skinned words. As expected of the familiar host's way of speaking, the system, which had been worried about depression because of disfigurement, finally sighed in relief. Wei Wei Bai had already reached the corridor and saw the torture room. Yu Xiaoyan was inside. There were also more than 10 poisonous snakes. Wei Wei Bai. There's another way to complete the mission. Immediately bite Yu Xiaoyan. Then I'll rush over to hug him and say goodbye to him. Normal men were about to die. They would also be so touched that their affinity would increase. Then they would coax her and say that she was amazing, and such a small mission could be completed easily. System. How much did she hate the male lead? Even the routine had to be reversed. She just didn't want him to have an easy time, right? The poisonous snakes were used to poison him to death. Wei Wei Bai yawned and finally strolled to the door of the room. The sound insulation was good. She couldn't hear the sound inside. So Wei Wei Bai reached out and knocked on the door casually. The door opened. It was Chen Shan. His serious face was filled with murderous intent, unusually unfriendly, but he saw the person outside the door clearly. He was stunned. Wei Wei Bai stood at the door. Her petite figure wearing pajamas of the same color as Yu Xiaoyan had a delicate beauty. Chen Shan was about to say something. Wei Weibai had already stepped in. The room was filled with the smell of blood. There were 3 men lying on the ground, covered in blood. One of the men in the middle was obviously the main character. He fiercely looked up, his face full of blood as he said, "Yu Xiaoyan, if you kill me, don't think you'll have a good time. My family will not let you off." Not far away, Yu Xiaoyan, who was wearing pajamas and slippers, sat on a chair. The man's features were cold and elegant, but because of the gentleness at the corners of his eyes, he appeared to be good-looking and warm. He laughed in a low voice and slowly drank a mouthful of hot tea before indifferently saying, "Anne, I'll wait for your family to come find trouble with me. Perhaps I'm too much of a slave to my wife. Everyone thinks that I'm not a man anymore." In the past, who would dare to use such crude and clumsy methods to harm the people around him? Moreover, she was the woman Yu Xiaoyan loved the most. Didn't they think that he had cultivated his character during this period of time? Did they really think that he was easy to bully? If he didn't clean up the situation, these people really thought that he was a Buddha, because he was a vegetarian. Yu Xiaoyan's eyes were as gentle as the spring breeze. His words were so cold that it made people tremble. "Throw it into the sea." After saying that, he suddenly realized something, and immediately turned around to look. He saw a familiar figure standing at the door. Wei Weibai was wearing pajamas and slippers. Her long hair was scattered behind her back, and her delicate little face was expressionless. She slowly looked at the blood all over the ground. Then, she casually glanced at the various torture tools beside her. Azura Field Hell. A slaughterhouse full of the smell of blood. She was out of place here. And even more out of place was the elegant and cold Yu Xiaoyan, who was sitting on the chair with the teacup in his hand, and his eyes full of affection. To read the full article at https://www.sashu.com to TXT download at https://www.sashu.com to read on. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Chapter 2734. When Yu Xiaoyan saw that it was her, his eyebrows trembled. He pursed his lips, and a trace of helplessness appeared on his calm and indifferent face. The man immediately put down the teacup, then casually picked up the coat on the back of the chair, and walked directly to her side. He shook the large mail coat, and put it on her. Then Yu Xiaoyan bent down, and reached out to touch her head. He asked gently, "Why are you here? Can't sleep?" Wei Weibai tiptoed, as if she wanted to see the people being tortured. However, Yu Xiaoyan quietly moved his body to prevent her from seeing. Wei Weibai frowned and said unhappily, "Yu Xiaoyan, do you think I'm weak?" Yu Xiaoyan's eyes curved. "How could that be? My Wei Wei can cheat all my assets. How are you weak?" Wei Weibai had just woken up, so there were still some sleep marks on her face, and her hair was messy. She was as stubborn as a child. She opened her pair of watery eyes and spoke softly, as if she was an adult asking for a reward. "Then am I better than you?" When Yu Xiaoyan saw her like this, his heart melted into spring water. His voice was hoarse, and the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up. "Yes, you're much better than me. Mission accomplished. It was easy. It was just a lie. For Wei Weibai, it was never a problem." The smile on her face disappeared. She reached out to push him away and walked forward. "Since I'm better than you, why didn't you tell me what happened? You're so perfunctory." Yu Xiaoyan stood behind her and spread his hands helplessly. His face was begging for mercy. "It's too late. You need to sleep." Her body needed to recuperate. He rarely let her sleep so late at night. Wei Weibai turned her head. There was a stunning coldness in her eyes. She smiled. "You just dislike me for being a burden. This person is the one who disfigured me, right?" Yu Xiaoyan stared at her for a while before finally sighing and nodding. Wei Weibai sneered. She casually took a whip from the torture tools and whipped it fiercely at the man in the middle. The force was terrifyingly strong. She said to the system, "If I can't beat this disfigured person to death, then it's my loss." System, how much does the host resent disfigurement? He lashed out with the whip several times. A hand gently held her wrist. He stopped her from continuing to smoke. Wei Wei Bai glared at him. Yu Xiaoyan seemed to be admitting defeat. Alright Wei Wei, your body is still weak. What if your hand hurts? Besides, such a bloody thing was not suitable for her. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips. The corners of her eyes were a little red, and a trace of grievance appeared on her face. Yu Xiaoyan's heart skipped a beat as he gently removed her whip. His voice was calm but firm. Those who bully you, I will help you bully them back. Wei Wei Bai stomped on his foot. You bullied me too. Yu Xiaoyan's lips trembled. It really hurt. There was a hint of a smile in his voice. So now I'm lying flat and letting you bully me, okay? Wei Wei Bai took a few steps back and snorted. You sure know how to sweet talk. Yu Xiaoyan reached out to hug her, but paused. Wei Wei Bai looked at him in confusion, but she saw that his face had turned pale. Just as she was about to move, she heard Yu Xiaoyan's fingers tremble as he said softly, Wei Wei, don't move. Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly. Yu Xiaoyan's mind twitched as he stared at the top of her head. A snake. Bright and colorful. It was obvious that it was highly poisonous. The snake coiled down from the light fixture, and its fangs were pointed at her neck. Because it had not touched it yet, Wei Wei Bai did not even feel the temperature of the poisonous snake. The rest of the people had also seen the poisonous snake. Everyone's expression changed, but they did not dare to move. They were afraid that the slightest movement would cause the poisonous snake to fall on Wei Wei Bai's neck. This kind of poisonous snake would instinctively wrap around the neck of an animal. Once it fell on Wei Wei Bai's neck, there would be no way to get it off. Chapter 2735. At this time of crisis, the man lying on the ground suddenly laughed hysterically. Yu Xiaoran, I'm going to die with you. Go to hell. After saying that, more than 10 colorful poisonous snakes crawled out of his body. The scene was chaotic. The chaotic sound alarmed the poisonous snake on Wei Wei Bai's head. It opened its poisonous fangs like lightning, and quickly bit Wei Wei Bai's neck. In an instant, Yu Xiaoyan's pupils constricted. He suddenly rushed over. He had already taken a short knife from the bodyguard. Everything was like slow motion in a movie. The knife in Yu Xiaoyan's hand was stuck in the poisonous snake's fangs at the critical moment. The snake's tail wrapped around the man's arm. It turned to attack him. Yu Xiaoyan heaved a sigh of relief and cut off the poisonous snake's head neatly. Poisonous blood splattered out. Then he immediately turned around, pressed the back of the girl's head with one hand, and pressed her into his arms. At this moment, Yu Xiaoran realized that his whole body was covered in cold sweat. The kind of fear that came from the trembling of the bones. It could almost drive him crazy. His voice was low and trembling. Fortunately, you're fine. If something happened to her, his world would collapse. But in the next second, he heard Wei Wei Bai's weak voice. Yu Xiaoyan, my leg hurts. This sentence was unusually calm, as if it was an ordinary greeting. Yu Xiaoyan's fingers stiffened, and his breathing stopped. Then he lowered his head, and found that there was a poisonous snake wound on Wei Wei Bai's leg. Chen Shan and the others subdued more than a dozen poisonous snakes. But no one noticed that Wei Wei Bai's leg was bitten by a small snake as small as a chopstick. This snake was unusually poisonous. Wei Wei Bai's leg began to turn black and purple. He immediately picked up by Wei Wei and yelled, "Search them for me, search them for the serum." It was impossible for a person who hit a snake not to have a backup. Chen Shan immediately rushed over and knocked out the man who released the poisonous snake. Then he stripped off his clothes. Yu Xiaoyan also rushed out. It would take time to search for the serum. She needed to go to a safe place. She didn't know if there were any more hidden snakes in that room. And he remembered that there were doctors on board for the banquet. And it was the kind that was very famous. He kicked open the doctor's door and yelled at the doctor who was preparing to sleep. "Get up and save her." He put Wei Wei Bai on the bed. The doctor was also frightened and immediately went to find the medical kit. The snake's venom flowed through the blood to the heart. Although Yu Xiaoyan immediately used a cloth to tie her legs, it was too late. Her face darkened visibly. Even his bright eyes had lost their luster. Wei Wei Bai was trembling all over. Her face was so pale that it made people despair. However, she pursed her lips tightly. From beginning to end, she only said that her leg hurt, and didn't say anything else. The girl's lips were already extremely dim. She lay on the bed. Her delicate and soft face lost its vitality. She didn't say anything, and just obediently watched Yu Xiaoyan desperately hug her. The doctor rushed over. He saw that Yu Xiaoyan had already cut open the wound with a knife. The poisonous blood began to flow down from the fair skin of her leg. Then, the man knelt on one knee and lowered his head to suck the blood. This was an inefficient mistake, and it was especially dangerous. The doctor was about to stop him. The crisp sound of a slap rang out. Wei Weibai got up halfway and slapped Yu Xiaoyan's face heavily. Chapter 2736. The man's fair face turned red in an instant, and the handprint was exceptionally clear. He looked up, his eyes were extremely red, and the despair and madness on his face was frightening. Wei Weibai said word by word, "It's useless. The venom has already entered my body. If you suck my blood like this, it's useless except for yourself. You should know better than me." Understood, how could he not understand? But was he supposed to watch as she was tortured right in front of his eyes? His fingers clasped her fingertips tightly, as if he was begging. The man was extremely humble. "Wei Wei, don't stop me." He couldn't do nothing, and let her continue to be so weak. A poisonous snake that could make the enemy perish together with her must be specially raised. This kind of poisonous snake was highly poisonous. Even if there was an anti-venom serum, it might not be able to save her. Yu Xiaoyan just understood too well, and his mind was too clear. Only then did he know how low Wei Weibai's survival rate was. His tone trembled, and he couldn't help but raise his voice. "You can't do this to me. You can't do this to me." Stop him from saving her. Even if it was just an ineffective rescue, he was also saving himself. Because if he just stood by and watched her die, he would not be able to do anything. He even felt that if he died, he wouldn't have to suffer this kind of torture. The man who had always been elegant and strong actually showed panic and despair in his eyes. Wei Weibai half leaned against the bed, as if she could smell the smell of death between her breaths. She chuckled softly. "Yu Xiaoyan, don't cry." As if she wanted to comfort him, she reluctantly reached out and touched his hair. It was as intimate as when he touched her. "I want to be better than you. I want power," she said with a weak smile. Yu Xiaoyan's voice was hoarse. "I'll give it to you. I'll give you whatever you want." But Bai Weiwei looked at him tenderly. Her round eyes held a moist smile. "You know, you're provoking people." Yu Xiaoyan's eyes were red. But even so, his eyes were still so affectionate and beautiful. Wei Weibai's fingertips fell on his soft eyelids. "If I'm stronger than you, I can protect you." Her voice was soft and gentle. "With power, I can make you." Bai Weiwei slowly bent down, lowered her eyes, and planted a kiss on the ends of his red eyes. "Don't cry." Yu Xiaoyan's eyes widened, but the tears in his eyes did not fall. He did not cry. The girl's face was already leaning weakly on his shoulder. "I remember back then, you were hiding under the chestnut tree in the love garden, and crying secretly. I wondered if you were bullied as well." Yu Xiaoyan stiffened. He had secretly cried before. The chestnut trees in the love garden were very dense. Under the tree was a secret location. The girl's voice was soft, and there was a smile in it. "I wanted to get close to you, but you glared at me coldly before turning around and leaving." Her breath was sweet and soft, and her voice gradually weakened. "But your eyes seemed to say that you liked me, so he had sunk into the abyss." Yu Xiaoyan had no impression of this matter. At this moment, it sounded like a heart-wrenching pain and regret. He begged in despair. "I like you, no, I love you." It was just that it was many years too late. Many years ago she liked him, but he turned around and left. Many years later he liked her. She could not abandon him. Yu Xiaoyan grabbed the clothes on her back tightly. The girl's voice gradually quieted down. He wanted to shout, to scream at her to wake up. But the words that came out of his mouth were almost lost. His thin lips trembled. He finally hugged her and buried his face in her hair, crying silently. To read the full article at https://www.sashu.com to read on. Com. Chapter 2737. He almost vomited blood and cried. But there was no sound. Just like when he was very young, hiding under the chestnut tree, and crying secretly. It was extremely quiet. There was not a single sound. It was indeed when he was most desperate, and in pain to his soul. If at that time, he did not turn around and like the little her, then, they wouldn't have missed it. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 100. Ding, 12 o'clock, the 3-month side mission is complete. There are 3 days left, do you want to stay? Yes. A lazy voice sounded. Wei Weibai sat on the bed expressionlessly. She watched as Chen Shan found the serum, and injected it into her body. Chen Shan seemed to have noticed something. He looked at her body in shock. But when he saw Yu Xiaoyan hugging Wei Weibai, he did not want to let go. But he did not dare to say anything to persuade him. The doctor was also trembling, like Chen Shan, desperately trying to save a dead person. And from the beginning to the end, the man was hugging her. He was so quiet, so desperate that he was rotting in silence. But it made people feel the most suffocating and the deepest pain. Wei Weibai hugged her chest with both hands. In her soul state, her emotions began to slowly return. Although the return was slow, it made her frown a little unaccustomed. She had almost no emotional fluctuations in the plane. Everything depended on her acting skills. So when she felt the throbbing feeling in her heart, she was not used to it. The system reminded, "Why aren't you leaving?" Wei Weibai touched her chin. "I haven't ridden on Yu Xiaoyan's neck yet, have I?" The system. Well, it was afraid that the host who lost the emotion blocker would suddenly feel pain and discomfort. After all, once people had emotional fluctuations, guilt, empathy, and empathy were all increasing rapidly. In the end, the host did not forget to practice acrobatics on Yu Xiaoyan. The system. So the original host has seen the crying male lead when she was young? Wei Weibai had been to the chestnut tree before. She even found a box and buried it. The system thought she was playing games out of boredom. After all, what kind of time machine game was this? Wasn't it just digging up a broken box after 10 or 8 years to see how stupid he used to be? Wei Weibai said calmly. No, I made it up. Okay, I got it. I'm used to it, ha. Wei Weibai. I think the atmosphere is too quiet, so I want to tell you a story to lighten the mood. System. The male lead had been fooled into a daze, thinking that he had really missed out on his childhood love. Wei Weibai sighed. Who knew you would believe it? It's my fault. The host who had lost the emotional shield. It was even more ruthless. He was impressed. 3 days was enough time for Wei Weibai's body to be transported off the ship and sent back to the Bai family's old mansion. They cleaned up the body and prepared the coffin. Wei Weibai didn't really hang upside down on Yu Xiaoyan or ride his neck. Yu Xiaoyan was busy. The man was dressed in a black suit and started to work as an undertaker. He cleaned up the body bit by bit. He sewed up the wound on her leg, removed the bandage on her face, and started to put makeup on the wound on her face. It was not pretty, especially when the skin of the dead was grayish-green. Wei Weibai looked at it with disdain. Yu Xiaoyan was unusually quiet as he carefully dressed her up. After she died, he didn't say a word. He had always been cold and elegant, noble and quiet. At https://www.sashu.com/full-text at https://www.sashu.com download text at https://www.sashu.com at https://m/sashu.com the Chapter 2738. It was so quiet that it was lifeless. It was like death. Wei Weibai floated cross-legged in the air and was in a daze with him. On the last day, she was lying in the coffin's freezer. The young girl's face was as delicate and flawless as a flower after special makeup. Her soft and delicate lips were also exceptionally red. She lay quietly in the freezer, her skin sparkling like jade. She was wearing a red cheongsam, gorgeous and luxurious. This was the best cheongsam in Yu Xiaoyan's collection. But he didn't let her wear it. Because the cheongsam had a story. It was a wedding dress made for herself by an embroiderer who died for love. Because her dead lover had gone to do business and never returned. And what he liked the most was the way she looked in the cheongsam. She had embroidered this cheongsam for 3 years for him. She had worked hard and her heart was full of love. 3 years later, the news of her lover's death came. The cheongsam was new because no one had the chance to wear it. Yu Xiaoyan collected it because of the exquisite embroidery. That story didn't touch him at all. It wasn't until he met Wei Wei Bai that he said, "Just look at the Cheongsam. It's not good." He loved her, so he wanted to pamper her. He wanted to hold her in his hands and take care of her carefully. Even if he thought too much, he couldn't bear to let her have any bad feelings. Wei Wei Bai just smiled and said, "Why are you hiding this dress?" Yu Xiaoyan listened and revealed a gentle smile. "Perhaps in the future, when we are old, very, very old, I will personally put it on for you when you die. When we go to the Yellow Springs, we can still get married again." Wei Wei Bai spat. "We haven't gotten married yet. How can we do it again?" Yu Xiaoyan said, "When I make 100 pieces of jade jewelry for you as your dowry, I will marry you." Only then did Bai Weiwei realize why he had been unhurriedly making those jade jewelry for her. It turned out that he was waiting to give it to her as a dowry. The jade was warm and waiting for the fated to gather. This was probably the deepest expression of love this man had ever shown. It was also the most romantic thing he could do. Everything was at the funeral. Yu Xiaoyan quietly dealt with everything. His expression was indifferent, and his eyes were dead and lifeless. Chen Shan followed him and forced him to eat, but he couldn't force him to sleep. He did not take a break from the beginning to the end. He was like a clockwork robot. At the funeral, he stood beside the coffin and looked at the young girl in the coffin who looked like a flower. Finally, the man slowly reached out and touched her face. He spoke softly, his voice unusually dry and hoarse. "I thought that I would leave before you. After all, she was still so young. So cute. It was the most tender, the best age. He was the one who should have died early, with a rotten heart." The exterior was bright and beautiful, but underneath the shell was rotten to the core. The corners of Yu Xiaoyan's mouth twitched, revealing an ugly smile. "You shouldn't have met me." No one who loved him had a good ending. It seemed that when he was very young, his family had once hired someone to check his feng shui. When the feng shui master saw him, he patted his head and said, "Deep love will not live long, and extreme wisdom will be damaged. In the future, your life should be rich and noble, but sigh." No one believed that sigh. He didn't believe it either. Later on, for some reason, every time in the dead of night, he would think of that sentence, that sigh. He couldn't remember what the feng shui master looked like, but he remembered his sentence. Deep love. He didn't believe in this the most, but he found that deep love was the most correct sentence. He couldn't forget his lost parents, self-loathing, and betrayal of their education. But to her the whole world collapsed. In the end, he pursued only one person, who loved him like the whole world. He got it, but he lost it again. Fast // fast to txt download fast to read on. Fast, Chapter 2739. Everything had been settled. After the funeral, Yu Xiaoyan came out to clean up the situation. Although there wasn't a river of blood, the families involved in the assassination were either dead or injured. After Yu Xiaoyan, who had been silent for a period of time, came out this time, no one dared to underestimate him anymore. Everyone trembled in fear at the mention of his name. As for Wei Wei Bai's death, it didn't cause much of a reaction. After all, she was just Yu Xiaoyan's vassal. Although Yu Xiaoyan avenged her so much after her death, it was just a moment of recklessness. After all, who could really love a woman to death? However, the news of Yu Xiaoyan giving the industry to Wei Wei Bai was widely spread in the female circle. Before she died, she received extreme love from a man. She didn't die in vain. Chen Shan only let out a sigh when he heard such vicious rumors. Then, he returned to the Bai family's old mansion. After Wei Wei Bai's death, the Bai family's door sign had never been removed. It was as if Yu Xiaoyan felt that when her soul returned, she would still see this place as familiar as before. She might stay a little longer. Chen Shan came to the front of the room. In the corridor here, the wind was blowing, and the fallen leaves actually carried a hint of desolation. It was already autumn. He still remembered that in the lotus pond, a group of men were desperately digging for lotus roots. In the end, a few of them even got 2 kilograms of lotus roots to bring home to stew. However, the lotus roots tasted really good. They were sticky and powdery. The lotus leaves had been cleaned, and the other flowers were blooming. When this place was designed, there were all kinds of flowers. Old Master Bai was also really elegant. He liked these broken things of flowers and plants. As a result, Yu Xiaoyan, who grew up in the Bai family, didn't hate these things. But once there was no one, this place was terrifyingly cold. Chen Shan stood at the door with his briefcase. The door was open. Yu Xiaoyan was sitting at the desk with all kinds of tassels on it. All kinds of small tools. There was also a large box of all kinds of beautiful nephrite jade, jadeite, southern red tourmaline, and so on. They all bought the most expensive ones. Jadeite. Just a large imperial jade bead had to be bought in advance. Chen Shan looked at it and felt that it was just a box of broken stones. However, it was good that Yu Xiaoyan had something to do. He walked in quietly and said in a low voice, "I've already cleaned up the entire group. The contract for the Hainan Airlines project has also been terminated. Our next step is to enter the M country market and win the multinational project for the next 2 years." The maritime aviation project had caused them to suffer heavy losses. However, he also used the failure as an excuse to reorganize the internal and external affairs of the company. Now, some of the problems left over from the previous transformation had been cleared up. Although the company's assets had shrunk a little, it was worth it. As long as Yu Xiaoyan was there, even if they faced failure, they would not be afraid to continue working hard. He was afraid that Yu Xiaoyan would not be able to pass this hurdle. Deep love is short-lived. Yu Xiaoyan's fingers paused. The tip of his finger was a light purple tassel, and below it was a bright red jade medallion. It was an exceptionally beautiful rock filled with water. He slowly raised his eyes. Under his long and narrow eyelashes, a pair of gentle eyes were filled with emptiness. His thin face, under the light by the window, almost turned into a lonely pale white. Yu Xiaoyan looked at Chen Shan for a few seconds, as if he was a little slow in thinking about who he was. Then he was not interested and slowly knitted his red jade pendant. There were also some beads for making bracelets on the wooden table. They were all very beautiful. Fast the fast comma. Chapter 2740. It was fine as long as Yu Xiaoyan liked it. He was just afraid that he wouldn't even like this. Then Chen Shan really didn't know what to do. Looking at Yu Xiaoyan like this, his heart also throbbed in pain, as if someone was hammering his brain with an awl. As a man, he didn't know how to comfort him. When he first saw Yu Xiaoyan, he felt that this guy was good-looking and had a pair of unusually seductive eyes. Of course, as a normal man, he didn't have any other thoughts. Did he have no other thoughts? This had to be clarified. But he was so exquisite and had such a pair of eyes. In the eyes of the older generation, this kind of child couldn't be raised for long. If someone gave him a cheap name when he was young and raised him crudely, he would be raised in the mud. When he grew up, his skin would be rougher, and he would look a little sunny. Then it might be easier to raise him. But a place like the Bai family forced him to be pampered. Thus, he developed the sensitivity of the 7 orifices heart. It also raised him to be fickle and affectionate. When the poor little Weiwei Bai appeared, he was relieved. Yu Xiaoyan had her. He finally had a man's offensive power, possessiveness, and direct violent love. He no longer looked like an immortal with a short life. He even ate the meat. It made them overjoyed. In the end, the poor little girl died before Yu Xiaoyan. Chen Shan felt that Yu Xiaoyan had brought out Sister Lin's sentimentality. He tried to comfort him. "I think she still wants you to be well." Yu Xiaoyan raised his head slightly. His pair of gentle and beautiful eyes were as cold as ice. He stared at Chen Shan for a long time before saying slowly, "Give me the transfer of assets." Chen Shan was puzzled. Weren't they all transferred to Weiwei Bai's name? However, after Weiwei Bai's death, these things still returned to Yu Xiaoyan's name by default. Chen Shan brought the things over. They were all in the study room. Yu Xiaoyan didn't pay much attention to them. In the past, he had spent all his effort to scheme for these assets. Now these things were no longer interesting to Yu Xiaoyan. Yu Xiaoyan opened the transfer of assets. Weiwei Bai's signature and fingerprint were on it. His fingertips traced inch by inch. It was as if he was caressing the girl's fingertips. In the end, a trace of grief appeared on Yu Xiaoyan's face. The man had become even thinner during this time. His movements were slow as he picked up the pen. The outline of the bones on his fingers was even more obvious. He was too thin. All of his vitality and warmth disappeared from his body. It was as if Yu Xiaoyan, who was sitting in front of the table and touching the table full of warm jade, was going to disappear at any time. Even Qin Shan couldn't bear to see this. Many brothers were waiting for Yu Xiaoyan to pull himself together. He had come here to advise him as well. But when he saw Yu Xiaoyan, however, no words of comfort or advice came out of his mouth. Yu Xiaoyan was already injured to the point that he was like a lonely soul. No matter how he advised the lonely soul to live, he was already living as if he was dead. Yu Xiaoyan's vision was a little empty. His slender fingers held the fountain pen and slowly began to write the contract for the transfer of property rights. Chen Shan watched as he read page by page. Everyone received a lot of things. In fact, the name Chen Shan actually replaced Yu Xiaoyan and Wei Wei Bai as the new leader of the group. Chen Shan's expression changed drastically. He was about to reach out to snatch the fountain pen in his hand. However, Yu Xiaoyan said slowly, "I'm still your boss." Chen Shan's entire body stiffened and his expression distorted. Read on. Calm. Chapter 2741. But in the end, he didn't go forward to snatch it. Because Yu Xiaoyan said that before signing, before the property transfer contract had legal effect, he was still his boss. What decision did the boss make? They all had to obey, including, he gave up everything he had. Yu Xiaoyan's fingers trembled, and the veins on the back of his hand were exceptionally obvious. The man was extremely pale, and his fingers had no strength. During this period of time, he couldn't have peace day and night. Even his nightmares didn't look for him, because he didn't even have the strength to dream. Yu Xiaoyan pushed the property transfer contract to Qin Shan. From today onwards, I will retire. You guys do as you see fit. If there are any problems in the future, you guys can solve them yourselves. At this point, Yu Xiaoyan quietly raised his head and saw that Qin Shan, a man, was already crying like a child. Yu Xiaoyan smiled. That pair of gentle and beautiful eyes that were like a spring breeze. At this moment, there was no trace of affection in his smile. There was only numb calm. I've taught you guys for so long. It's time for me to rest. Qin Shan choked and said, "You're still young. You still have a lot of things to do. You can get through this." Yu Xiaoyan's finger landed on the medallion. Under his fingertips, the pure red color flowed with a beautiful light. There was nothing on the medallion. It was just a broken stone in a square shape. Yu Xiaoyan said calmly, "There's nothing else I want to do. Even if I do, no one will look at it." His entire life, he struggled bitterly in the darkness. From the moment he stepped into the Bai family, he had abandoned his conscience to live. He would be consigned to eternal damnation. After suffering for so many years, he had great power in his hands and was high and mighty. But he was waiting for someone to redeem him, pull him out of the darkness, love him with a completely unrecognizable person and a rotten heart. Yu Xiaoyan thought of the past, but he couldn't remember Wei Wei Bai's situation in the Bai family. Or rather, for the first time, he really had an impression of her. It was opening the wardrobe door. Her pair of innocent and clean eyes started from the moment his figure was imprinted on them. For a moment he actually felt that. Everyone said that his eyes were good-looking. It turned out that there was someone whose eyes were much better looking than his. When she looked at him, it was as if she was in love with him. Yu Xiaoyan put aside the tassels he had made. He quietly lowered his eyes. There was no light in his eyes. "You may leave." His voice was indifferent. After Qin Shan left with tears streaming down his face, Yu Xiaoyan didn't move. He sat by the window and looked at the 100 pieces of jade jewelry. Chong Sam, bracelets, rings, necklaces, anklets, they were all designs that he liked. He liked the way it hung on her body even more. Yu Xiaoyan's aesthetic sense was somewhat Chinese. He liked jade stones and the like. His appetite had been spoiled by the Bai family. He had too many thoughts, too many calculations, and his sense of beauty was also unusually old-fashioned. The Bai family was the shame of his life. It was also the hell that had created everything for him. Yu Xiaoyan stared blankly out the window and suddenly saw the chestnut tree. The dense chestnut trees had already begun to bear fruit. In the past she used to hide and cry down there. Little did he know that someone was watching him. Had she been looking at him for a long time? But he didn't care about her at all? If only I had liked her earlier, she wouldn't have been bullied so badly. Unfortunately, there were no ifs. Yu Xiaoyan smiled, but found that the corners of his mouth were unusually stiff. He slowly got up, like a lonely soul, and came to the chestnut tree. Yu Xiaoyan touched the tree trunk and looked around silently. Read on. Calm. Chapter 2742. You can search Transmigration System. Prince Charming. Come to the search website www.sashu.com. In Baidu to find the. At that time, where was she hiding to look at him? Yu Xiaoyan suddenly coughed heavily. When he reached out to cover his mouth, he saw under the tree. A familiar tassel was tied to a branch. A smoky green Hatian jade magpie plum card was hanging from the tassel. It was the collar press he made for her. Why was it placed here? Yu Xiaoyan looked at the place where the jade pendant fell. It seemed to have been turned over. He stretched out his pale fingers and gently landed on the turned soil. After hesitating for a moment, he exerted force with his fingers and plunged them heavily into the soil. He almost couldn't wait to dig out the thing in the soil. It was a box. It was so shabby that it even matched a cheap box. When Yu Xiaoyan saw this box, he felt that it was too familiar, but also unfamiliar. It was too distant a memory that he couldn't remember what this box looked like. Yu Xiaoyan hesitated for a moment before opening the box. A brand new photo appeared in the box. The girl in the photo was wearing a light green cheongsam, a smoky green magpie card, and a bracelet he made on her wrist. She was leaning against the armchair that he often sat in. She smiled brightly. When she took the photo, she had been nourished by him. Her slightly round face could already be foreseen as a beautiful color when she matured in the future. She was an exquisite girl, but her smile was exceptionally cute, with a pure childishness. This photo? He didn't even know when she took the photo. Yu Xiaoyan was stiff for a long time before he reached out and picked up the photo. Under the box was an old family photo. The young him was sitting in an armchair. His parents stood on both sides of him, smiling exceptionally happily. He was also smiling happily. This was the last family photo of their family. At that time, his father was deeply trusted by the old master. He brought him and his mother to see the old master, and took a photo in this armchair in the hall of the Bai family's old house. It was like a kind of honor. Ironically, not long after this photo was taken, his parents died under old Master Bai's scheme. Yu Xiaoyan looked at it for a long time. Only then did he realize the girl's posture, smile, and the position of the armchair. It was exactly the same as him. It was as if it was on purpose. She couldn't enter this family photo, so she took a picture of herself in the same pose as him. It was as if she could sit with him on the chair in the hall, through a photo from many years ago, become a part of the family portrait. Yu Xiaoyan watched for a long time, and also squatted under the tree for a long time. Finally, just like when he was a child, he stretched out his hands and hugged his knees tightly, burying his head in his knees. Without a sound, his entire body began to tremble violently. However, there was no sound of crying. "I love you," he said silently. Word by word he spat out his blood. "I love you. So don't abandon me again." Wei Bai held her face in her hands and floated in the air, watching quietly. He said that he would take 3 days to complete the mission. She thought that after the funeral she still couldn't leave. It had already been 3 months. She floated here. The system and the side missions were busy repairing the space-time tunnel. Although the time limit was only 3 days, she could only stay for 3 days. But because of the loss of control, the passage was hit by an unimaginably huge storm. The main system immediately gave all the raiders a break. Before the tunnel is repaired, none of the invaders were allowed to leave the plane. If they left now, they would also die. Therefore, it was rare that Wei Bai still stayed by Yu Xiaoyan's side after her death. Wei Bai watched expressionlessly. Yu Xiaoyan held the box and slowly walked into the garden step by step, as if he had lost all his strength. Wei Bai had no choice but to be pulled forward by him again. After death, the soul could not leave the target of the mission. Yu Xiaoyan was as thin and pale as a soul. He wandered aimlessly in the love garden. Wei Weibai felt that he was more like a ghost than she was. When he was finally tired, he leaned against the corridor and sat curled up. His slightly protruding knuckles were holding the box. After a long time, Yu Xiaoyan slowly closed his eyes due to exhaustion. Wei Weibai floated a few steps forward and stared at his sleeping face for a long time. She couldn't help but reach out her finger and touch his face. "You've lost weight," she whispered. Chapter 2743. This action was a little intimate. Wei Weibai quickly withdrew her fingers. She didn't allow herself to be touched. After all, her man was waiting for her at home. Even if she felt that she was trash, she couldn't have any sympathy for him. Wei Weibai stared at him for a long time and felt a little tired. Like a cat, she yawned and sat beside the man. The system finally repaired the passage and rushed over. He was afraid that Wei Weibai would be bored in practice hanging upside down on the male lead. When he came back, he was stunned. Under the bleak corridor, the leaves fell in the cold wind. The man was sleeping quietly. Beside him, a girl in soul form was also leaning on his shoulder, sleeping peacefully. It was like an incomparably beautiful painting. It froze time and stunned time. The system blinked. For some reason, it felt a little sour at the corners of its eyes. Then it gently reached out, wanting to carry Wei Weibai back. A hand, out of nowhere, swept it away. The system rolled a few times, and when it stood up, a tall figure had already walked out of the sleeping Yu Xiaoyan's body. He bent down and gently picked her up. The girl's soul condensed into a beautiful white light. "Let's go." Yi Yushuan's voice was calm, but gentle. It was as if the damage in the plane to him couldn't compare to the moment of joy when he picked up Wei Weibai. The system's mouth twitched. The touched feeling just now was gone in an instant. As a system, the host was taken over by force every day. Could it still play properly? Yi Yushuan was indifferent. The system immediately rolled up its sleeves and said enthusiastically, Coming. In the blink of an eye, the space-time passage opened. The warm back view of a family of 3 disappeared on the spot. Not long after the space-time storm, the passage was a mess full of space-time cracks. If you weren't careful, you might fall in. Those who were luckier would fall into another plane. A bad person might fall into a bottomless abyss, never to see the light of day again. If it was only the system, he would definitely be trembling in fear. However, there was a big boss in front of them. All he had to do was follow in his footsteps. Would Yi Yushuan stand still? Then she touched Wei Weibai's soul. This was a soothing power. Let her sleep deeper. Unknowingly, he had become more familiar with his own power. When he reached the door that was close to reality, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. Under Yi Yushuan's thick and curved eyelashes, there was a golden halo in her eyes. At the border of reality, it was dark and quiet on one side. On one side was a land of bones. They had always been separated by a line that separated them into 2 worlds. However, at this moment, the pitch-black area at the entrance of reality was filled with floating golden light spots. Under the golden light, a few white bones were casually thrown into the dark path. Yi Yushuan also noticed it. The red line on his wrist, Wei Weibai's red line, began to tighten. This power was much stronger than before. The person who was similar to him in the land of bones. He had always wanted to take her soul away. Yi Yushuan felt danger. This kind of danger came from an instinctive warning from the depths of his soul. If he let go, he would never see her again. Yi Yushuan believed this warning so much. The white bones fell into the darkness on this side. Perhaps the power of the line in the middle was beginning to be destroyed. To read the full article at https://www.sashu.com/txt download at https://www.sashu.com to read on. To facilitate the next reading, you can click on Chapter 2744. And this huge space-time storm may have been caused by this. Yi Yushuan's fingers curled around the red thread, and then pulled it, not letting the red thread have any possibility of being dragged to the white bone land. Then he let the soul palm be cut. He still walked into the door with no expression. The white bone land was still desolate. the man sitting on the white bone throne. His golden eyes were dead silent. Finally, there was a fluctuation in those dead eyes. His eyelashes also trembled, as if he was awakened by something. The man finally looked up, and looked behind the isolation line. The door of the reality. This time, he did not lower his eyes for a long time. But after staring for a long time, his fingertips moved. He seemed to want to stand up. But for some reason, he slowly closed his eyes again. Those golden light spots gathered around him again. The white bone land was still desolate. But his palm began to crack slowly. It was the scar of the soul. Wei Bai opened her eyes. Her vision was a little blurry. It was the light. It seemed to be night. She struggled to get up and called, Tongzi. The system was gnawing on a chicken leg, stealing it from the side quest. Once back in reality, he could not see the side quest's refrigerator. So he took advantage of the time before returning. When the side quest was repairing the passage, he carried the refrigerator into his own space. This was also for the good of the side quest. With so many high-calorie things, he could not eat too much. These things had to be eaten by the malnourished. It just so happened that he was particularly malnourished. Then, he returned to the next seat, and tried to eat all the things in the refrigerator. Wei Bai seemed to hear the sound of the system eating. She was silent for a while. She touched her stomach. She was hungry too. Then she asked, did Xian take sleeping pills? Although it seemed that she had not heard Qin Xiu for a while. She also did not see Yi Yuxuan take any pills. But she was afraid that this thing would repeat. The system said, no, he's very obedient. What sleeping pills? He hugged the host and slept endlessly. Every day, he followed them across the plains and ran everywhere. He was extremely healthy. When Wei Bai heard this, she asked her father again. When the third day was up, his father happily came to visit again. So when Wei Bai went out in her slippers, she saw her father and Qin Xiu playing games. Qin Xiu. Ha ha ha, I said this game is fun. Look, you can even change equipment. Bai Changyan, how can I change? I found it. I'll change it for a bikini. Wei Bai silently went behind the sofa and stuck her head out to take a look. Bai Changyan and Qin Xiu were playing a female game on their S. Furthermore, both of their characters were actually female. Bai Changyan's character was a 32D big-breasted beauty. She was walking around in a bikini. And Qin Xiu's character was a little cutie, wearing the clothes of a beautiful girl warrior. What burned her eyes was that Qin Xiu was also chatting with other little boys. Sob sob sob, big brother. I've taken a fancy to that little angel's wings. But I don't have any coins left. The spendthrift brother in the game. Kiss me and I'll give it to you. Qin Xiu immediately sent a voice message. Chirp chirp chirp, 3 kisses, I'll buy it. Wei Bai. Wait, while she was asleep. What happened to her father and the attending doctor at home? Were they transmigrated? Or were they coquettish in nature? Together they broke their legs. Wei Bai coughed. Download the at https://msashu.com. Collect below to record the reading record of this time. Chapter 2744 Reality 1. Chapter 2745. Bai Changyan's fingers trembled. Without turning his head, he immediately turned off the phone. Then he turned around and said with a guilty smile, Daughter, you're awake. I knew you would wake up today, so I bought groceries in advance to see you. Wei Bai calmly looked at Qin Xiu. Qin Xiu held the phone and slowly moved away a little. After confirming that he had received the gift of clothes from the little boy, he smiled and turned off the phone saying, Your physical condition is very good, Wei. How could it not be good? Her HP had already reached 13,000. Calculating it, it would be more than 35 years of life. In addition to her current age, a person with a short life could be counted as a lifetime. Wei Bai showed a gentle smile. Soon I will be able to recover, and you can go back to the hospital to help people in distress. Don't always lead my father astray. Qin Xiu, I'm taking your old father to play some games that are good for his body and mind. Wei Bai, a transvestite, deceiving a little boy's poor pocket money to buy a little angel dress? Is this good for his body and mind? Seeing Bai Changyan's guilty look and Qin Xiu's shameless appearance, Wei Bai calmly patted her old father's shoulder. Learn more, you're still young. As a businessman, how could he not be thick-skinned? No wonder their family's company has never been big. Then Wei Wei Bai turned and walked to the kitchen. The system said, "Dinner time has passed, but no one has eaten, waiting for you to wake up. Yi Yuxuan is in the kitchen making soup for you." Wei Wei Bai paused and couldn't help but look back. Then he saw Bai Changyan and Qin Qiu happily playing with their S. She couldn't help but smile. She only felt that she had stepped through so many hardships and walked through so many strange worlds. In the end, she came back here. Everything was worth it. Every time she came back, she experienced the warmth of her family. It was more like a coordinate, a reminder, telling her all the time. This was where she had to come back, and where she could finally return. Wei Wei Bai walked into the kitchen. He heard the sound of something being thrown away. She poked her head out to take a look, and saw a slender figure bending his body. His fingers were on the fridge door, and he was throwing a pile of things into a plastic bag. Wei Wei Bai narrowed her eyes. There were a bunch of snacks, stimulating drinks, and sweet milk tea. There were even 2 burgers. Thinking of how Bai Changyan said that he was going to buy groceries to see her, she knew that he must have bought a bunch of snacks. Meanwhile, Yi Yuxuan was destroying those snacks. After all, to prevent her from drinking the stimulant last time, he had shamelessly snatched it from her. Yi Yuxuan didn't like sweet, high-calorie, delicious but unhealthy food. He also felt that she shouldn't eat too much. He still needed to be taught. If they really got married in the future, would she have to follow his eating habits? Young man, you won't be able to get a wife like this. Wei Wei Bai decided to teach him, so she quietly walked behind him and reached out to touch his back. The muscles on his back were warm, and the curve of his shoulder blades was exceptionally exquisite and sexy. Yi Yuxuan's back stiffened, and he knew that she was about to wake up. After getting out of bed, he immediately rushed to the kitchen and threw all these things away. Bai Changyan and Qin Qiu were one step faster, and the fridge was already filled with their spicy chicken food. These were all Wei Wei Bai's favorite foods. It wasn't that he didn't want to let her eat, but her body was special now, so he had to watch over her. He felt her fingers gently slide down his back little by little. Button the Chapter 2746. Yi Yuxuan's indifferent expression finally showed a trace of fluctuation. He pursed his lips and sighed. "I won't throw it away," Wei Wei Bai said with a smile. "Throw it away, continue to throw it away." Yi Yuxuan. Clearly, all of her actions were to tell him not to throw it away. This was simply a suicidal choice. He felt that her hand had already reached an unspeakable place. He immediately opened his mouth, his voice incomparably hoarse. "If you touch it again, I'll really throw it away." Wei Wei Bai's fingers paused, and then left his back. Yi Yuxuan breathed a sigh of relief. He was like a bomb to her, and she was still desperately trying to ignite the fire. Did she think that his self-control was too good? But in the next moment, a pair of hands gently followed his waist. The person behind him had already intimately attached herself to him. A warm and soft body, a familiar scent. His back was pressed by her, like a big cat lying on his back. Yi Yuxuan had a helpless expression, but he couldn't help but smile. His indifferent eyes were filled with a gentle warmth. Wei Wei Bai hugged his waist tightly, her whole body pressed against his body. Her voice was soft and sweet. "Brother, I want to drink milk tea." Yi Yuxuan's body stiffened, his breathing became heavier. "Don't be like this." Wei Wei Bai giggled. "Brother, buy me a small cake or a small biscuit, okay?" Yi Yuxuan. Wei Wei Bai rubbed his firm and warm back, squinting her eyes and saying comfortably, "Brother, I like to drink coffee and eat chocolate." As if accepting his fate, Yi Yuxuan took out the things in the plastic bag one by one. 2 boxes of chocolate, a cup of milk tea, a small cherry cake, spicy chicken feet, various biscuits, fragrant drinks, tooth decay candy. The refrigerator was quickly filled with a pile of junk food. Yi Yuxuan pursed his lips, his eyes unfriendly for a while, and then said helplessly, "Okay, stop rubbing." Wei Wei Bai imitated Qin Qiu's cheap look. "Big brother is the best. Listen to me. I'll give you a kiss." Chirp, chirp, chirp. 3 heavy kisses landed on his back. Under his clothes, his muscles suddenly tightened. The system spat out its chicken drumstick. He thought that his tolerance level was high enough, But in the end, the host could always come up with even more disgusting methods to make him malnourished. What the hell is chirps? How old are you to play? Wei Wei Bai was done. She felt that this method was very useful. It was so disgusting that it made people listen to it. When Wei Wei Bai saw the refrigerator full of snacks, she couldn't help but reveal a wolfish grin. She was just about to let go of Yi Yuxuan. However, she found that the man's fingers were already clasped around hers. The next second, the fridge door was slammed shut. Bai Weiwei was pulled by him, clasped by the waist, and slammed into the refrigerator door. Behind her was the snow-white fridge door, but she saw Yi Yuxuan lowering his head. His eyes under his eyelashes were deep and dangerous. He said in a low voice slowly and seductively, "Chirp?" When she said chirp, it was disgusting at first glance. Yi Yuxuan's voice gently rose, and when he said chirp in a hoarse voice, it was so sexy that it was obvious that it was used to seduce people. Wei Wei Bai's smiling face stiffened, and she immediately said, "I'm hungry." She started to change the topic. It couldn't be that she was disgusted by Qin Xiu, so she used this trick to disgust Yi Yuxuan. Yi Yuxuan's face was still calm. He slowly blinked, and his voice was a little vague. "Well, I'm hungry too." Wei Wei Bai, the experienced driver. Don't think that she didn't know what he meant. Wei Wei Bai's breath also deepened. She raised her head, and her eyes curved. "Then what do you want to eat?" Her lips were red, as delicious as the cherries on the small cake that was about to be thrown away. He always knew, Yi Yuxuan thought. If she wanted to seduce a person, then everyone had to kneel under her skirt. This was also the reason why he knelt so many times. Yi Yuxuan's fingers gently ran through her long hair. His eyelashes were half closed, covering the fiery light in his eyes. And then he bowed his head and kissed the top of her head. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. This action was so gentle. It could be called pious. Chapter 2747. Wei Wei Bai was dragged out of the kitchen by Yi Yuxuan. She was still in a daze. While waiting for dinner, she finally came back to her senses and couldn't help but reach out to touch her hair. She looked at her fingers strangely. This kiss, it was not strange for Yi Yuxuan to kiss her. What was strange was that he used such a gentle attitude to kiss her hair. Yu Shaoran seemed to have this habit too. He would kiss her hair for no reason. To him, it seemed that this action represented some kind of deep and reserved love. Yi Yuxuan was just cold and indifferent, without much emotional fluctuation. Although he was gradually becoming more like a human, but his actions were the same as Yu Xiaoyun's. Wei Wei Bai stared at the table in front of her, and suddenly took out her laptop to go to the shopping website. As a girl, it was rare for her to have free time. Of course she would buy something to relax. Unknowingly, she made handmade nephrite jade lapel pressing. One after another, some of them were eye-piercing, some of them were garish, and some of them were garish. It was really ugly. Many of these jades were glass products at first glance, or they were pressed with jade powder. Wei Wei Bai felt that her eyes were spoiled. They were so ugly that she couldn't bear to look at them directly. She could only look at the most expensive ones. Finally, she saw a few that were pleasing to the eye, although the picture filters were particularly heavy. As she flipped through, she saw a design that was very similar to Yu Xiaoyun's style. She asked the system, "Does this look good?" The system was drinking bird's nest soup with lobster fried rice and abalone stewed soup. It said, "It's okay." Wei Wei Bai. "Then which one do you think looks good?" The system. "The colorful one just now looks good." It was the one that was dyed at first glance. A piece of plastic dyed with a rainbow color was really good looking. Wei Wei Bai felt that the system's aesthetic was really worrying. It didn't have her elegant and beautiful taste at all. Well, that piece of plastic was dyed really well. After Yi Yuxuan finished washing his hands, he came out and said coldly to the old couple, who were laughing and laughing, "Okay, go and serve the dishes." Bai Changyan and Qin Xiu immediately put down their phones. The two of them quickly ran into the kitchen like the waiter. One of them carried the rice pot, while the other carried 3 dishes. Basically, all the servants in the apartment had been chased away. Only a housekeeper from the Yi family was left. She came 3 times a day, but this time, Wei Wei Bai woke up late. The nanny left. Yi Yuxuan prepared the meal herself. Wei Weibai was waiting to eat. No one dared to let her into the kitchen. No matter how clean the kitchen was, there should still be detergent. Who would dare to eat the dishwashing detergent one day, if she poured it into a pot as a condiment? No, Yi Yuxuan dared to eat it. Then, he continued to squat in the hospital, and had his stomach pumped. Yi Yuxuan saw Wei Weibai lying on the sofa, looking at her laptop. He walked over and casually put down his sleeves. Reaching out, he gently ran his fingers through her long hair, and stroked her head. "I'll look at it after dinner." His voice was calm, but unusually gentle. Wei Weibai was not used to it. She reached out and scratched her hair. Then she looked up and said with a smile, "Well, okay." Yi Yuxuan casually looked at the computer screen. "Do you like these?" His tone was normal and unusually calm. Bai Weiwei narrowed her eyes, her finger carelessly touching one of the photos. "This one looks good. What do you think?" Warm brown with a rustling matte light. A small square of sugar jade. Pure black tassels hanging below. An unusually beautiful and clean design, similar to the style designed by Yu Xiaoyan. Chapter 2748. Yi Yuxuan casually glanced at it and said indifferently, "It looks good, I'll buy it for you. What else do you like? Put it in the shopping cart, and clear it out together." Bai Weiwei casually swept her eyes over his handsome face, which barely had any fluctuations. After looking at it for a while, she suddenly smiled. "If you don't like it, you can make it for me." Yi Yuxuan's eyelashes fluttered. It was a strange expression that was not obvious. Even before Wei Weibai noticed it, it disappeared. He grabbed her arm and pulled her up from her prone position. He helped her sit up with strength and agility. "When I buy the materials, I'll make it for you," Yi Yuxuan said indifferently. Wei Weibai stared at him for a while, then said with a smile, "Well, let's eat." Then, she tugged at his sleeve, got up, and walked to the dining table. Bai Changyan had already brought the last dish. Qin Xiu was filling the bowl. "It's time to eat," the attending doctor shouted. Wei Weibai walked over, pulled out a chair and sat down. Yi Yuxuan, who followed behind, looked at her back, and a trace of thought appeared in his eyes. Or did he reveal a flaw? Wei Wei's action just now, was she suspicious? The jade tassels were Yu Xiaoyan's handiwork, not his. She had always avoided bringing too much of everything in that world to reality. She would not ask him to do the same things as the people in that world. Unless she was suspicious. Could it be that guy, who was neither a man nor a woman, told her something? Yi Yuxuan's fingers touched the back of the chair. And just as he was about to pull it out, his eyes fell on his fingers. Suddenly he woke up. The way he kissed her hair and smoothed it with his fingers was too similar to that of Yu Xiaoyan in that world. It was exactly the same. Every time he came back from that world, he would be unable to control himself and be affected. No matter how cautious he was, he would occasionally miss some small habits that would remain. Moreover, before he discovered these little habits, he would not think too much about them. Because of the familiarity that was almost integrated into the soul, Yi Yuxuan's expression was indifferent. She slowly pulled out a chair. Then, he sat down and picked up his chopsticks to pick up some food for Wei Weibai. Wei Weibai didn't say anything else. She had always been good at hiding things. Yi Yuxuan's eyes were calm. If she was suspicious, she would observe little by little instead of questioning. Because that was the only way to kill in one strike. How could he dispel her suspicions? It was rare for Yi Yuxuan to be troubled. After the meal, Qin Xiu automatically cleaned up the dishes. Bai Changyan assisted. The two of them happily went to wash the dishes. Meanwhile, Yi Yuxuan was on the phone, giving orders remotely. She also asked someone to release some jade stones or something. The staff members who were instructed were already used to these inexplicable instructions. After all, he had even bought love slippers, love toothbrushes, towels, and so on. All that was left was the day when the boss would order her to buy a love condom. Their work was very professional. They could guarantee that they could do what they were told. And they could even hold back their laughter. Yi Yuxuan was busy with his work. Wei Weibai wanted to lie down and become salted fish after eating. She was too tired in the plane, so she wanted to rest when she came to reality. She didn't know what the system was eating. Although Wei Wei Bai was still willing to let Tongzi eat better now. But from the time she came back until she was full, surprisingly, he could still hear the sound of the system. Like a mouse, it was still eating. It couldn't be that it would eat all her life points before it stopped, right? Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but ask the system, "How much life points have you eaten?" The download the Chapter 2749. The system was drinking a 28 La fight and eating a 39 steak. Ah, I'm eating my own private savings. Didn't I grab a bunch of expired food when the supermarket was on sale recently? I'm eating. There's also a time limit for free, so I have to eat faster. Otherwise, in the next plane, the side quest would come to ask for the refrigerator. How could such a righteous person not return it? After all, it wasn't him. So before coming to the next plane, he had to eat more to make up for it. What do you mean you don't need to make up for it? Does being shameless count as making up for it? This refrigerator made him pay the price of being shameless. After Wei Wei Bai heard this, she actually felt a little pity. Let's not eat expired food. It's not good for the body. The system was touched. Its relationship with the host had finally come out. Thinking about the first few planes, the host couldn't wait for it to die. Wei Wei Bai. If you eat something bad, the medical fees are much more expensive than the food. If you die from eating, it's over. If you don't die from eating and become paralyzed from eating, wouldn't you blame me for a lifetime, right? The system took a bite of the steak and almost choked to death on the spot. Wei Wei Bai laughed. Am I not joking? You eat more, don't be shy. System. What's wrong with completely losing your appetite? After Wei Wei Bai said these words, she felt that she was really too concerned about the system. Was there a host who cared about the system as much as she did? No. She and the system were indeed the best and most affectionate pair in history. Wei Wei Bai even felt a little proud. After washing the dishes, Qin Xiu and Bai Changyan walked out with a smile. The two old men put their arms around each other's shoulders and were unusually affectionate. Then they very tacitly sat on the sofa opposite Wei Wei Bai and began to play games. Kinship was precious, but a daughter was expensive. In terms of which one was better, let's talk about it after the game. Wei Wei Bai was speechless at this pair of old and childish ghosts. Then she silently picked up her phone and silently searched for the little game to change equipment. It seemed very fun. Download it and try to change equipment. She could even ask other little brothers to buy equipment for her. That little angel dress, old and cute. Qin Xiu was not good, but he had good taste. Then the group of old people playing games became a family of 3 playing games. The 3 of them laughed and joked as they played the game with a bored expression on their faces. The system silently and continued to eat. Paralyzed from eating, he wanted to cling to the host for life, who told them to be a beautiful family. Ha 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 ha. Yi Yuxuan always felt that the atmosphere was a little strange. He silently turned around and saw those strange people. After a silence for a while, he calmly called. After all, to support. He couldn't fall behind in his work either. After all, it wasn't easy to support his family. It was just. Yi Yuxuan, who had also reached the end of his work, calmly put down his phone and turned off his work computer. Then he calmly got up and walked behind Qin Xiu and Bai Changyan. Then he grabbed one of them by the collar and pulled them out. Qin Xiu. Bai Changyan. Yi Yuxuan calmly dragged people out, loosened his collar and calmly said, "It's late, go back to sleep early, otherwise it's not good for health." Bai Changyan and Qin Xiu. Yi Yuxuan. Is there anything you didn't take away? Bai Changyan and Qin Xiu pondered. Yi Yuxuan. If you can't remember, go back and think about it. I will help you deal with the things you left behind. Collect below to record this reading record. Chapter 2750. Qin Xiu couldn't help but ask, "How do we deal with it? Send it to the door?" Yi Yuxuan's voice was flat. "Throw it in the trash can." Bai Changyan and Qin Xiu were silent again. Yi Yuxuan asked indifferently, "Is there anything else?" Not waiting for the two to speak, Yi Yuxuan suddenly realized, "It seems that there is nothing else." After that, the door closed. After the two people outside the door were silent for a long time, Qin Xiu said, Xian Xian seems to be a little angry. Is it because we have been here for too long and occupied his dating time? Bai Changyan frowned. This young man's temper is too big. I have to consider whether it is a good idea for Wei Wei to marry him. Qin Xiu immediately put on a smiling face. Young people are hot-blooded and have a bad temper. Let's educate them again. Bai Changyan sighed. I don't blame him because he is pitiful. Qin Xiu was surprised. Did Bai Changyan already know Yi Yuxuan's illness? Yi Yuxuan didn't have any emotional problems. Except for the Yi family elders, some core relatives of the Yi family. Basically, no one knew the specific illness. But he heard Bai Changyan's face. He was forced by Wei Wei, so he has to take responsibility. Qin Xiu. After closing the door, Yi Yuxuan saw her lying on the sofa. Her chin was resting on her arm, and her hair fell to her cheeks. Her white skin and black hair formed a clean color impact. It was obviously not seduction, but it was charming. More and more beautiful. Yi Yuxuan knew that this was not an illusion. But every time she woke up, she couldn't get rid of the change. Whether it was her temperament, character, or appearance, she was more or less affected. Just like him, even if he restrained himself, the influence gradually turned him into a person. A normal man who loved her. Yi Yuxuan lowered her eyes, suppressed the surging love in her heart, and walked to the sofa, without showing any expression. Then she picked up the blanket and covered her waist. Lie on your stomach. Don't forget to cover yourself with something, so you don't catch a cold. Wei Wei Bai's eyebrows with a bit of laziness. She unhurriedly stretched out her fingertips and hooked his tightly buttoned shirt collar. Her fingertips exerted force and pulled. The shirt buttons were torn apart, revealing half of the collarbone. What? You want to persuade me to take good care of myself? Yi Yuxuan lowered his eyes, and the light above his head cast a hazy halo on his face. His voice was hoarse. Getting better is good for me. The old driver. Don't think that she didn't know what he meant. Was she infected by Qin Xiu's chirps? Bai Weiwei's eyes narrowed slightly, and the corners of her eyes were dyed red. Slowly, she loosened her grip on his loosened collar and moved up. His TSShites? Then she wrapped her arms around his neck and hooked her legs around his waist. Yi Yuxuan stopped breathing, and his hands couldn't help but clasp her waist, for fear that she would fall. Wei Wei Bai's hair was spread out, and the loose cuffs fell to her elbows, revealing her white forearms. Her forehead was against his, as if on purpose. Her voice was delicate and tender. Do you think my body is good like this? She directly coiled herself around him. Her posture was more flirtatious than a vixen's. Yi Yuxuan felt that the surging love in his chest was about to be aroused by her. If the soul could be moved, it would be attracted by her. His voice was low. You, don't mess with me. Although this sentence was calm, it was almost a plea for mercy. Download collections. Chapter 2751. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were like silk, and the seduction in her eyes was faintly discernible. Her bare ankles lightly rubbed against his trousers. How am I messing with you, Mr. Yi? The light in Yi Yuxuan's eyes gradually changed from calm to a burning focus. Although his expression was calm, one could see the slight sweat on his forehead. You can mess around as much as you want, he said in a low voice, and the end of his voice had a husky magnetism. Wei Wei Bai wrapped her arms around his neck, and as if on purpose, she smiled and leaned closer to him. How am I messing around? I just want to whisper something to you. She was like a vixen. Every inch of her body was so bewitching. Her voice was low, soft, and sweet. When she leaned close to him, the tip of her nose brushed against his fair chin. Yi Yuxuan felt his face start to heat up. This was instinctive. It was not shyness. It was a kind of passion caused by an overly repressed and fanatical desire for her. She did this to him. It was really too cruel. She was so seductive, but the examination in her eyes was so blatant. It was as if she was searching for a secret on his body that she had not found out. And she was too confident in his self-control. What do you want to say to me, whisper? His voice was so low that it was unimaginable. It was almost suppressed in his throat, bringing out a hint of sexiness. Wei Wei Bai's smile started to become seductive, as if a vixen had directly taken over him. She stared at the hot sweat on the man's forehead, which slowly slid down his handsome cheeks. Wei Wei Bai's smile deepened, and her breath gently brushed against his skin. Is it hot? Yi Yuxuan's expression was calm, and he forced himself to say, It's okay. Wei Wei Bai. Oh, she dragged out her tone, and her lips were already close to his face, slowly moving down. This was an intimate action that was similar to rubbing against him. To the man, it was the last thread of reason that broke. He felt that he didn't want to hear any more whispers. If this is the trial of torture, he was probably going to surrender completely. Whatever she asked, he would tell her. Wei Wei Bai was still rubbing against him unhurriedly. In the next second, she was smashed onto the soft sofa. The man on top of her had already knelt on one knee on the sofa. His hands clasped her shoulders, and he looked at her with a strong and crazy gaze. What do you want to tell me? I'm listening. Yi Yuxuan's gaze was like intertwined silk. In her half-closed eyes, there was a sharp and gorgeous love. He lowered his head, and his slender body overshadowed Wei Wei Bai. If you want to hear any secret words, I can also tell you, he said with a scorching tone. If you want to hear anything, I can also tell you. Wei Wei Bai held her breath. She only felt that the man on top of her was standing against the light, his handsome face full of forbearance. Yi Yuxuan is cold, indifferent, calm, and ascetic. However, she tore apart the label of this man bit by bit, revealing the fiery passion within. And this Yi Yuxuan is more like a human, and more attractive. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but purse her lips, not wanting to let herself show a covetous expression. All of a sudden, all the doubts and probing disappeared. The corners of her eyes began to turn red, and the tips of her ears also turned red like peach blossoms. Her eyes didn't move as she stared at him. It was as if she had passed through countless fragmented worlds. She finally returned here, saw him, and he didn't let her regret it every time, abandoning everything in those worlds and coming back again. Chapter 2752. Wei Wei Bai suddenly reached out and cupped his face. Her fingertips gently rubbed against his cheeks. His cheeks were flushed, and his temperature burned her fingertips. Yi Yuxuan. Her voice was soft and gentle. In the future, I will like you very much. She couldn't say that she loved him now. She couldn't say that she loved him. She couldn't say that she was loyal to him. She couldn't say that she belonged to him alone, because her mission had not been completed yet. She could only say that it would be in the future. That was the future that she had worked so hard for so long. And in the future, she would like him very, very much. Her future was for him. Yi Yuxuan's pupils contracted slightly. He looked at her serious expression without blinking. In an instant, he understood the meaning of this sentence. His body was still warm, but his heart was filled with gentleness. The corners of his eyes curved up, and the corners of his mouth rose. A smile spread in his eyes. Wei Wei Bai saw that he was smiling so happily, and felt a little embarrassed. He was so happy that he had turned into a fool by making an empty promise. It made people wonder if water had entered his brain. It was sometimes good and sometimes bad. But she felt that he was very cute like this. Wei Wei Bai also smiled. The doubt in her eyes disappeared. She pulled him down. The atmosphere was intimate. The atmosphere was natural. Everything seemed to be just right. The overlapping shadows under the lights seemed exceptionally beautiful. Just as something was about to happen, the doorbell rang. Yi Yuxuan and Wei Wei Bai. The doorbell rang for a long time. Wei Wei Bai immediately let go of him and lay back on the sofa. She calmed her breathing. Her face was red, and her eyes were misty. Yi Yuxuan was in a much worse state. He pulled the blanket over and wrapped Wei Wei Bai, hiding half of her face under the blanket. Although her clothes were not messed up yet. But he couldn't bear to see her like this. Then he stretched out his long legs and stepped off the sofa. He reached out and smoothed his messy hair back, revealing his fair forehead. His expression darkened, and his eyes regained their calmness. There was even a trace of unfriendly coldness in them. As he buttoned his collar, he walked towards the door. By the time he opened the door, his collar was already buttoned to the top, completely covering himself. Outside the door was his company's staff. A man and a woman smiled respectfully. Director Yi, the things you wanted are here. We specially selected the best materials. We guarantee that the small ornaments made will be super beautiful. Miss Bai will definitely like it. Yi Yuxuan's expression was gloomy. Her originally exquisite face now looked like a carefully carved piece of art. There was not a single trace of life. He clearly didn't show the slightest hint of displeasure. However, the smiles on the two staff members' faces froze. He felt a murderous aura. What was going on? Yi Yuxuan stared at them silently for a while before reaching out to take the box. Scram. His voice was unusually calm and indifferent. There was no fluctuation. There was no fluctuation of emotions that made people scram at all. Then the door was closed. The staff standing outside stood in a daze for a long time, before touching the goosebumps on his arms. Director Yi, it's so scary. The female staff member trembled as she spoke. The male staff member asked, "Did we disturb something?" The two staff members recalled Yi Yuxuan's state. When they said that, it did seem like she was disturbed by something, which was why she was so angry. The two staff members revealed anti-smiles. "Aya, we won't prepare a crib next time, right?" Hee hee. Hee hee. Chapter 2753. After all, Yi Yuxuan was famous for looking like a robot. It was rare for him to have more human emotions. The employees of the company were also happy. Who would be happy that the boss had no human feelings at all? Wasn't he looking for trouble? And the boss who was in love was easy to talk to. Just thinking about it made him feel that his previous boss was like a cold-hearted demon king. Yi Yuxuan, who was holding the box with a dark expression, saw that Wei Bai had already lifted the blanket and was lying on the sofa happily playing games with his phone again. The speed at which he changed his expression, the charming and gentle atmosphere, just now was completely destroyed. Wei Bai turned back and smiled happily. Xian, do you want to play a cross-dressing game together? I'll buy you an angel outfit if you chirp a few times. Yi Yuxuan. Then he put down the box silently, turned around and walked back. Wei Bai asked casually, "Where are you going?" Yi Yuxuan replied calmly, "Bathroom." Wei Bai nodded and said, "Remember to ask for cold water." Yi Yuxuan's footsteps paused, and then he finally suppressed his heavy breathing helplessly, entered the bathroom, and closed the door heavily. Wei Bai, who was lying on the sofa, couldn't help but laugh silently while holding his phone. How cute. He probably had to take a cold shower this time. Wei Bai laughed and said, "Tongzi, do you think Xian looks like Yu Xiaoyan?" The system almost choked on a mouthful of fish gelatin chicken soup. It was immediately dumbfounded. "Huh? What? What did you say?" "I was just locked in a small dark room." Wei Bai narrowed his eyes. "Oh, you can't hear clearly, right?" The system immediately said, "I heard clearly. Do you think Yu Xiaoyan looks like Yi Yuxuan? I think they're super alike. Look, they're both men. They have 2 eyes and 1 mouth. They're about the same height, and their hair is black. They look alike in every way." Wei Bai. There didn't seem to be anything wrong with that description, but he kept feeling that something was wrong. The system replied, "How can they not be similar? Their personalities are more alike. They're cold on the outside and don't know how to talk. Who are they trying to impress with that cold face of theirs?" Wei Bai. That makes sense. Both of them were extremely calm. However, there seemed to be quite a lot of men with such personalities. Comparing them like this, it seemed that the difference between the two of them was quite big. After all, Yu Xiaoyan was so sorrowful and self-pitying. He was still a very artistic young man. Yi Yuxuan had a calm personality, but she was also related to Yu Xiaoyan. As for the rest, they were completely different. After all, she had never seen Yi Yuxuan being so cultured, especially when it came to jade. He reckoned that in Yi Yuxuan's eyes, those Hetian jades and mutton-fat jades were all broken stones. Bai Weiwei's heart was at ease, and she continued to giggle and play games. The system heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, although the host was smart, he wasn't someone who would go to a dead end and come up with a solution. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't be able to hide Yi Yuxuan's secret. Once the secret was leaked, based on Big Boss Ye's nature, no one would be able to live well if he exploded. He didn't want to be treated as the person who leaked the secret and be beaten to death. As expected, Yi Yuxuan slowly came out of the bathroom after a while. His wet hair had been wiped clean, and the black hair fell softly in front of his forehead, giving him a sense of casual handsomeness. Then without a word he opened the box. It was a pile of rainbow-colored tassels. A pile of high-quality jade bread rings, luxurious jade brands, jasper beads and emerald lotuses appeared. T crossover system. Prince Charming, come here. Chapter 2754. Wei Wei Bai originally thought that Yi Yuxuan would not care about those broken stones. However, when she looked up, she saw that this man was actually holding a tassel and a broken stone, and studying it with his head lowered. Yi Yuxuan frowned for a while before slowly looking at Wei Wei Bai. Do you think this thing is really beautiful? Wei Wei Bai stared at him for a while before saying unhurriedly, then what do you think? Yi Yuxuan was expressionless. A pile of broken stones. He really felt that way. He even felt that it was really strange that he liked these things in that world. Therefore, what he was most affected by was his implicit and crazy love for her, hidden in a kiss of hair. As for the rest, for example, he planted flowers and vegetables every day and felt sad for the lotus flowers. He even carried a pile of broken stones and tassels to do manual work. He did not understand at all. He did not want to understand either. Wei Wei Bai's mouth twitched. Don't you think they are very beautiful? After all, they are very expensive. Yi Yuxuan stared at the pile of stones seriously for a long time before seriously commenting, IQ tax. Wei Wei Bai. Yi Yuxuan suddenly thought of something and looked at her again. It's quite beautiful. Don't you like it? I'll tie these colored lines to the stones for you. Such beautiful jade handicrafts. He described them as colored lines and stones. He immediately felt that it was really an IQ tax. Wei Wei Bai touched her chin and sighed. All right, you can just make a collar for me. Yi Yuxuan nodded, and then casually took out his phone and sent another message. What needs a collar is a cheongsam, or a traditional Chinese dress. Which one do you like? Wei Wei Bai said casually, a cheongsam. Yi Yuxuan nodded calmly. Everything was very natural. This natural made Wei Wei Bai put down the doubts in her heart. After returning from the plane, he might still be immersed in the emotions of the plane. After all, she had been in the plane for a while this time, so she didn't have an emotional shield. Perhaps it was also the infection during this period of time. She might have thought wrongly when she came back. Although she thought so, Wei Wei Bai still observed Yi Yuxuan's movements from the corner of her eyes. He is checking his phone. Wei Wei Bai tried to take a look. A complete manual of collar pressing teaching you how to quickly weave a jade pendant and so on and so forth. That's right, Yi Yuxuan didn't know how to do that. His fingers were exceptionally beautiful. His knuckles were well defined, and the broken stones on his fingertips looked even more moist and beautiful. Yi Yuxuan sat for a long time. Only then did she slowly weave a tassel that looked like a China knot. Although it was his first time doing it, it was not bad. But it was a little ugly. Wei Wei Bai squinted at the man next to her as she played the game. After watching for a long time, she started to feel sleepy. When Yi Yuxuan finished another craft, he saw Wei Wei Bai leaning against the sofa and falling asleep. Her soft face was light pink from sleep. Her hands were hanging under the sofa, and her phone had fallen onto the carpet. She was like a child. Yi Yuxuan let go of the stones, then walked over, bent down, picked her up and walked into the room. She shouldn't have suspected anything. Yi Yuxuan thought calmly. It was too easy to guess her mood and observe her expression. And she trusted him too much. He didn't show any signs, so she really thought that there was nothing wrong with him. Yi Yuxuan stuffed her into the quilt, letting the quilt tightly wrap around her. Then he lowered his head and kissed her deeply, just like how she thought that he would cool down after taking a cold shower. In fact, his skin was still hot. Under the dim yellow light, she finally felt uncomfortable and hit him with her hand. He let go of her. Then, afraid that he would be impulsive, he touched her face to comfort her and turned to leave the room. Yi Yuxuan felt that he would die of depression sooner or later. He sat back on the table, and his fingers instinctively made an unusually complicated and beautiful craft to suppress himself. This kind of complicated and instantaneous little thing. It was Yu Xiaoyan's ability. Yi Yuxuan stared at this thing for a long time and calmly opened it. It was like he was opening up everything in that world. This was good. If she wanted to continue, he couldn't give her any burdens. Yi Yuxuan sat at the table for a long time, before he finally breathed a sigh of relief. It's good that you're willing to come back. He was really afraid that one day she would stay in another world. Then Yi Yuxuan bent down to pick up the phone she dropped and accidentally swiped the screen. He saw that Weiwei Bai was actually playing a transvestite account. He even said generously to a female player, "Chirp me. I'll buy you a flower suit." Female player, "Little brother is the best, chirp chirp chirp." Yi Yuxuan's expression darkened. Weiwei Bai slept comfortably. Suddenly, her lips were pressed down by something, and she had difficulty breathing. She struggled to wake up, but saw the man with his back to the light with a gloomy face. "I heard that if I chirp you, you'll buy a suit for others. Little brother?" Weiwei Bai. He was just playing a game to relax. Was he jealous? When Yi Yuxuan saw her unrepentant appearance, he suddenly kissed her on the lips 3 times in silence. Weiwei Bai. Yi Yuxuan. "If I kiss you, will you buy me equipment?" Weiwei Bai stared at him innocently. Suddenly, she couldn't help but laugh. She hugged him with both hands and pulled him onto the bed. "I'll buy it for you. I'll buy it for you. I'll buy whatever you want." She lay in his arms and kissed him gently. So don't be angry, my little brother. At the bottom to record this reading. Crossover system. Adonis, come over here, comma. Chapter 2755. Yi Yuxuan only felt a warm and soft breath, which made him sluggish for a moment. Then the person in his arms said sleepily, "Okay, go to sleep." After she kissed him, she promised to buy him equipment. Then she hugged him with both hands and legs, not afraid that he would be beastly. She rubbed her head against his chest and muttered, "Men are so delicate." Yi Yuxuan was speechless for a moment. Then he pursed his lips, pulled the blanket over, and covered her. Then he instinctively lowered his head to kiss the top of her head. Suddenly, he paused and slowly kissed the side of her ear. Softly he whispered, "You only know how to mess with me." Messing with him like this. With a smug look on her face. What's the difference between her and the little devil? Bai Weiwei, who was in his arms, had already fallen asleep. She had a hateful appearance that ignored everything. Yi Yuxuan also closed his eyes. He felt the sweet and soft temperature in his arms, and felt his heart full. Under the gentle light, the man's ears were still red. When she kissed him just now, the fever seemed to take a long time to subside. Weiwei Bai stayed in reality for a few weeks. She downloaded a cross-dressing game for Yi Yuxuan. She bought him equipment. She chased after him every day, calling him darling, "I'll give you the whole world." Yi Yuxuan's face was calm. Weiwei Bai was a transvestite, and he was a normal male number. So the strange thing was, in the game, the two men were together every day. Qin Xiu, the transvestite, would tail them from time to time, and Bai Changyan secretly went online to peep. It was simply a perverted family, but it was the one with the most purchasing power. Every time Weiwei Bai bought some good-looking skin and threw it to Yi Yuxuan, Yi Yuxuan would double it, or even 10 times to buy it for her. A childish game. It was a large-scale scene of dog abuse. The game dealer was probably the happiest one. His HP of 14,500 had been full for a long time. No matter how long he stayed, he would only have the same amount of HP. Weiwei Bai sometimes thought about not transmigrating at all. So many years were enough for her to squander. And if she really lived that long, she wouldn't be pretty when she was old. But occasionally, when she woke up from her sleep, she would see the man hugging her as he slept. He was so beautiful that he could be compared to her. He would probably be a handsome old man when he got older. Then she must be an old beauty. When he thought about it this way, he actually felt that there was nothing wrong with fighting a few more rounds to earn more HP. So Weiwei Bai said to the system, "Let's go smash everything." The system ate until it was full. It struggled to empty the remaining items in the refrigerator, and hid them in its own refrigerator. Finally he managed to eat it. The rest of the food filled his fridge, until there was nothing left. The side watch's refrigerator was much bigger than his. He didn't eat more. His fridge couldn't hold so much food. He heard Weiwei Bai say that she was leaving. The system bent down and rubbed its round belly. Coming. If he ate too much, he had to walk more to digest it. Wei Wei Bai's soul had just left her body. Yi Yuxuan opened his eyes. He lowered his eyes and stared at her for a long time, before continuing to hug her. Then he slowly closed his eyes. He fell into a deep sleep. Wei Wei Bai woke up this time with a foot basin in her hands. Then, she focused her eyes and saw that she was standing in an ancient-looking corridor. The lanterns above her head emitted a faint light. The pavilions outside the corridor were unusually winding and beautiful, and she was wearing an ancient female outfit. She wore a light yellow narrow-sleeved shirt and a garnet red long skirt that covered her shoes. Address of the full text: https://www.sashu.com. Download of the full text: https://www.sashu.com//. Chapter 2756. She moved her feet. Oh, it was the feeling of embroidered shoes. It seemed that this time it was set in ancient times. Wei Wei Bai looked calm, and saw that the corridor was full of servant girls. This should be the backyard. At first she thought that she was also a servant girl. However, she saw that the servant girls who passed by bowed to her. Although they turned around, they couldn't help but look at her with mocking eyes. It wasn't obvious. For Wei Wei Bai, it was too easy to observe this. And most of the servant girls' clothes were light green or light blue. The material of their clothes was not as good as hers. Just as Wei Wei Bai was holding a foot basin with a cute face. The system was finally back. He was too full and ran too far with his soul. He was too tired and paralyzed for a long time before he crawled back. Memory input? Wei Wei Bai could calmly deal with the aftereffects of the memory input. Yes, input it. When the memory was transmitted, the automatic notification sounded. This mission is to obtain Lu Xinglan's love. Target, Lu Xinglan. Completion 0, time, to be determined. He must be addicted to waiting for the mission time. Wei Wei Bai almost rolled her eyes at the completion time. After accepting the memory, she continued to walk forward slowly. The memory made her face a little pale, but her expression changed from calm to nervous, shy, and expectant. Her identity in this world was a concubine. Happened to be the concubine of the target, Lu Xinglan. When Wei Wei Bai saw this identity, she really wanted to twitch the corners of her mouth. She had been someone's wife so many times. She was a little not used to suddenly having a concubine. And her identity, before she became a concubine, was also a servant girl. This also explained why those servant girls were so disdainful when they bowed to her just now. After all, they were of the same background. And her identity as a concubine was especially bad, because it was the madam of the Lu family who forced it on her son. And the reason she was chosen was that she was good-looking and looked good. Wei Wei Bai, give birth to a baby. What was worse was when the original owner was sent to Lu Xinglan's room with her face cut open. Lu Xinglan was currently fighting against enemies at the border. He had no idea that he had a concubine. And Mother Lu was in such a hurry to get someone to send it over. It was just that Lu Xinglan was already 23 years old, but she still didn't get close to women, nor did she get married. In ancient times, he was considered an extremely old bachelor. Anyone would be anxious if they were in his shoes. However, he had a problem that prevented him from starting a family. Yes, Lu Xinglan hated women. It was the kind of disgust that made him want to vomit whenever a woman approached him. And it was uncontrollable. It was like the physiological reaction of someone who hated coriander and wanted to throw up when they smelled it. Lu Xinglan happened to hate women. All women, no matter if they were young, old, or even his mother. Just looking at it made him want to vomit. This was an illness that couldn't be cured. This worried Lu Xinglan's mother. She was the only child in the family. Several generations of the Lu family had made great contributions in battle, but in the end, they all died on the battlefield. And this tragedy was exchanged for monstrous power and the terrifying control of the military. In the end, it all fell into Lu Xinglan's hands. And he didn't disappoint. He led the entire army and defeated the cavalry of the Northern Kingdom. He also broke the guts of those people. He raised the reputation of the Lu family to another level. His career was incomparably successful. Only his family was left. He was the only male left in the Lu family. If he didn't get married, he would have to wait for the family line to end. Mother Lu couldn't bear it. At https://www.sashu.com/full text at https://www.sashu.com download at https://www.sashu.com at https://m/sashu.com. Chapter 2757. A bunch of loyal subordinates who followed Lu Xinglan couldn't stand it. They started to arrange blind dates for him. In the end, they finally found a girl with a good family background and a good reputation. She was also the most talented and beautiful girl in the capital. Lu Xinglan must be satisfied. The two sides agreed to meet when they went to the temple to offer incense. Afraid that Lu Xinglan would refuse, Mother didn't tell him. Mother Lu simply didn't tell him, and just asked him to escort her to the temple. Then, she cleared the place and Mother Lu took the opportunity to leave. She let the most talented girl meet Lu Xinglan. She thought that such a perfect girl would fall in love at first sight, get married at second sight, and hold a baby. However, before Mother Lu and the others could smile happily, the most talented girl was kicked out of the temple. Lu Xinglan stood at the door like a demon and said coldly, "I hate women. Everyone." Lu Xinglan's eyes were filled with killing intent. "If you're a woman, don't come near me." Disgusting. He became famous after one battle, especially after the most talented girl was kicked, until she was bedridden for 3 months, and almost died. No woman dared to approach Lu Xinglan anymore. In the future, any woman who saw him would take a detour. They were afraid that they would be kicked to meet the king of hell. To treat his illness, Mother Lu sent servant girls to him every day. In the end, not a single servant could enter his room. They were all sent out. Mother Lu was even more ruthless. She replaced the entire courtyard with servant girls. As long as Lu Xinglan returned from the battlefield, the servants by his side were all servant girls. The people who served him were all women. In the end, Lu Xinglan served himself. None of those women could even think of getting close to him. This time, Lu Xinglan was hit by an arrow on the battlefield. Although it was scary but not dangerous, the godly doctor who followed him immediately treated him without any sequelae. However, Mother Lu was so scared that her eyes almost rolled back and she fainted. She was even more determined to leave a descendant for Lu Xinglan. Then she saw the original owner. She immediately raised the original owner's status and sent her to her son's courtyard. She didn't give her son, who hadn't returned, a chance to refuse. As for why she liked the original owner, because she was beautiful enough. Wei Wei Bai asked the system, "Am I the most beautiful girl in this world?" System, motherfucker, other than the number one beauty in the host's mind, is there nothing else? He resisted the urge to complain and said, "No, she just looks like a fox." This was what the information said. He didn't know what it meant to be seductive. After all, his host had turned into a fox, but he didn't think that she was bewitching. Instead, she was more like a little husky. Wei Wei Bai. Bewitching? Wasn't this the appearance that the elders hated the most? How could he be chosen by Mother Lu? Bai Weiwei thought about it for a moment and understood. After all, she wanted her son to be enlightened and know the good of women. Of course, he couldn't choose a lady from a noble family. If it wasn't for her bad reputation, Mother Lu might have even gotten the most popular courtesan in the brothel. This was also a case of a desperate patient turning to any doctor available. If Lu Xinglan kept away from women like this, the first one to go crazy would be his mother. However, she had to look more foxy and seductive to seduce men. How could Mother Lu disregard everything and praise a servant girl? There was no mirror here either. She stared at the hot water in the foot basin. Yes, it was warped and rippled with heat. She couldn't see her face clearly. Wei Wei Bai didn't care anymore. It was fine as long as she knew that she wasn't disfigured. Lu Xinglan came back and was resting in the room. She held a foot basin and was going to fulfill her duty. Washing feet. She could have babies as she washed. at https://www.sashu.com/full text at https://www.sashu.com download text at https://www.sashu.com at https://m.sashu.com//. Chapter 2758. Wei Weibai finally walked to Lu Xinglan's courtyard. The courtyard was empty, and there was a place like a martial arts arena set up outside. There were knives, spears, sticks, and all kinds of targets. Several of them had been smashed, and were on the verge of collapsing. Wei Weibai, she felt that those targets were her head. What was going on? The door of the house was wide open, and the moonlight poured in. The curtain of broken beads was lifted and tied to one side. An incense burner could be seen in the room, and the smoke of agarwood was floating. Although Lu Xinglan was the highest-ranking military commander, with the title of Great General and many military achievements, he was not a simple brainless general. He liked to read and was good at strategy. The staff officers and military counselors around him were just decorations. And after the battlefield, he liked to live a refined life. The style of the house was elegant like a scholar. Wei Weibai held a basin of water, and her hands were already sore. There was really no one in the courtyard. There seemed to be a page boy or something, but she didn't see anyone. The system said, "The male lead is sitting inside and reading. He sits in a relatively remote place. Others can't see him at the door, but he can see anything at the door." Wei Weibai, such a person is very vigilant. Looking for a place to read was like squatting on an advantageous spot to hunt, and secretly peeping around to be at ease. She stood at the door and didn't say anything. Instead, she was silent, and there was even hesitation and uneasiness on her face. There was a trace of expectation and fear in her eyes. The pomegranate red dress was also moving slightly. It was unusually urgent and uneasy. On one side of the bead curtain in the room, there were many books thrown casually on the rosewood table. On the table, wide black sleeves were casually hanging on the table. A delicate hand like jade was casually flipping through the books. He heard someone coming, but he was too lazy to look up. The heat of the night was hot, and there was an ice basin in the room. Wei Weibai wandered outside for a while, and asked the system for the side reward. The side reward from the previous plane was so tiring. Even if the reward was useless, she wouldn't let it go. After all, she could cheat the main system a little. The system had already searched every corner of the supermarket discount area. Finally, he found a decent reward for him. Ding! Side reward released. Wei Weibai waited for a while. What reward? Why is there no instruction manual? The system said, "Warning, it's stuck. It's a type of fragrant essential oil. It's been sprinkled on your body." Wei Weibai was at a loss. What's the use of it? The system said, "Isn't the male lead disgusted by women? It's probably because your feminine scent is too smelly. As a reward, I'll sprinkle some fragrant essential oil on you. I guarantee that your feminine scent will be different from the rest. He won't be able to stop himself from smelling it, and definitely won't vomit." Wei Weibai, what if it's not the taste that disgusts him? Then the reward is useless, hehe. Wei Weibai, could this reward be any more unreliable? Trash. Wei Weibai felt that if she continued to stand at the door and chat with the system about the side quest, it would be too late. He was probably going to have a heart attack from anger. She resumed her persona and gently stepped forward. She was well behaved, but she did not make a sound. Just as his foot touched the threshold, she heard a voice that was as cold as ice and as crisp as broken jade coming from inside the door. "Go back." Wei Weibai's footsteps paused. Her eyelashes fluttered, and her voice contained a trace of soft surprise. "Young master." Her voice was unexpectedly pleasing to the ears. It made the man who was reading a book look up indifferently. He saw a petite figure standing at the door outside the beaded curtains. She was as graceful as a willow in the spring breeze. She bent her body, as if she wanted to see something. Her pair of charming eyes were wet. Her fair face had a delicate blush because of walking. She was like a flower bud that was pinched and tender. She was extremely charming, but had a pure and simple beauty to it. The man who was sitting at the table was slightly stunned. He saw that the audacious girl had already stepped into his room. The moment of stagnation in the man's eyes disappeared and was replaced by a trace of impatience. She really was not afraid of death. It seemed that he would have to kick another one out. That you're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.